Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me here, in this quiet place. For the next while, we're going to step away from the rush and noise of the world outside. We're going to slow down. We're going to breathe. We're going to spend time together in a snowy woodland cabin, where winter has settled in deep and peaceful. This isn't just a collection of facts, though you'll learn many things along the way, 100 of them, woven together like threads in a warm quilt. This is an experience. A journey into stillness. A chance to rest your mind while gently engaging it, to let the details wash over you like snowfall, soft, steady, accumulating into something beautiful. You might be listening as you fall asleep, letting these words carry you toward dreams. You might be working on something with your hands, needing gentle company in the background. You might simply be seeking a moment of peace, a refuge from whatever the day has asked of you. However you've arrived here, you're welcome. There's no rush. There's nowhere else you need to be. For these next hours, this cabin is yours. The fire is burning. The broth is simmering. The snow is falling outside, transforming the world into something simple and pure. So settle in. Get comfortable. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders drop. Let yourself arrive fully in this moment. We're going to explore the small wonders of a winter evening, the science of snowflakes and the art of making broth, the sounds of the forest and the silence of falling snow, the warmth of fire and the comfort of simple tasks done slowly, with care. Each fact, each observation, each small detail is an invitation to notice, to appreciate, to be present with the world in all its quiet complexity. So take a deep breath. Let it out slowly. And let's begin. Picture this: you're standing at the edge of a snow-laden forest, where pine branches bow under the weight of fresh powder. Ahead, through the stillness, a thin ribbon of smoke curls upward from a stone chimney. The cabin waits. Winter here doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It arrives quietly, one snowflake at a time. And here's something wonderful: each snowflake that falls is truly unique, forming around a tiny nucleus of dust or pollen in the clouds above. High in the atmosphere, where temperatures drop well below freezing, water vapor seeks out these microscopic particles: a speck of dust, a fragment of pollen, even a tiny particle of sea salt carried on the wind. Once the water vapor finds its anchor, it begins to freeze, and ice crystals start building outward in 6 directions, following the hexagonal structure of ice molecules. As each snowflake tumbles through different layers of clouds, encountering varying temperatures and humidity levels, it grows in its own distinct way. The journey from cloud to ground might take an hour or more, and during that time, the conditions the snowflake experiences, whether it passes through wetter or drier air, warmer or colder zones, create its unique branching pattern. Scientists estimate that the possible variations are so vast that the chance of 2 complex snowflakes being identical is infinitesimally small. No two are quite the same in their delicate, branching arms. You crunch forward through the snow, and immediately, you notice something beneath your boots. That satisfying sound, that crunch, happens because snow makes different sounds depending on its temperature, and experienced winter travelers can actually gauge the temperature by listening to their footsteps. When snow is very cold, below about 15 degrees Fahrenheit, it produces a high-pitched squeak or crunch because the ice crystals are hard and brittle, fracturing sharply when compressed and rubbing against each other like tiny pieces of glass. The colder it gets, the higher and more piercing the sound becomes. But when snow is warmer, closer to the melting point, it contains more liquid water between the crystals, which acts as a lubricant and dampener. The crystals compress more quietly, and the sound becomes muffled, almost soft. Some people who spend their winters in places like Alaska or northern Canada can estimate the temperature within a few degrees just by how the snow sounds underfoot. It's the forest telling you its temperature with every step, a kind of acoustic thermometer beneath your boots. As you approach the cabin, you scan the snow around you. The surface isn't blank, it's a diary. Fresh snow reveals animal tracks like a natural journal, showing who passed through, when they passed, and even something about what they were doing. There, near the woodpile, the paired prints of a rabbit, those distinctive marks where the larger hind feet land ahead of the smaller front feet in that characteristic hopping pattern. You can tell this rabbit was moving at a relaxed pace. The prints are evenly spaced, not stretched out in the panic of flight. And further out, near the tree line, you spot the neat line of fox tracks, one paw placed deliberately in front of the other in an almost straight line, efficient and purposeful, conserving energy in the deep snow. The gait tells you the fox was hunting, moving with intention rather than hurry. In winter, when food is scarce and every calorie counts, you can read the story of survival in these marks. The places where a mouse burrowed up through the snow, the spray of powder where a hawk struck from above, the meandering path of a deer seeking browse. The woodland is more alive than it appears, and the snow captures every moment of that hidden life. You reach the cabin door, fingers cold, breath visible in small clouds. Inside, the warmth embraces you immediately. There's a pot on the stove, and you lift the lid to find a golden broth simmering gently. Bone broths have been simmered in winter kitchens for thousands of years, not just for warmth, but because slow-cooking bones, often for 12 to 24 hours, releases collagen, minerals like calcium and magnesium, and amino acids like glycine and proline that support joint health, gut lining, and overall immunity. In traditional cultures from France to China, from Jewish communities to indigenous peoples across North America, the practice of using every part of an animal included making rich, nourishing broths from bones that might otherwise be discarded. The long, slow simmer breaks down the connective tissues and marrow, creating a liquid that's both deeply flavorful and genuinely therapeutic. In the cold months, when fresh vegetables were scarce and the body needed extra support to stay warm and healthy, a rich broth was medicine and comfort combined. It's why grandmothers across cultures have reached for soup when someone falls ill. There's real science behind that folk wisdom, nutrients that are more easily absorbed when they've been gently coaxed from bones over many hours of patient cooking. You ladle some into a wooden bowl and wrap your hands around it. The steam rises, carrying sense of time and bay. You settle into a chair near the window, watching the snow continue its gentle fall outside. Snow doesn't fall at the same speed everywhere. The rate depends on the size, shape, and density of the flakes, with larger, wetter flakes falling faster, sometimes at 2 to 3 miles per hour, while tiny, intricate crystals with more surface area relative to their weight drift down at less than 1 mile per hour. Those delicate, star-shaped snowflakes with elaborate branching are like tiny parachutes, catching air resistance as they descend, which slows their journey considerably. They might take an hour or more to reach the ground from the clouds above. Meanwhile, graupel, those small, round pellets that form when supercooled water droplets freeze onto falling snowflakes, are denser and plummet much faster, sometimes at rates of 5 miles per hour or more. That's why some snowfalls feel soft and floating, the kind where you can watch individual flakes drift lazily past the window, while others are heavy and quick, accumulating rapidly on the ground. Tonight's snow is the drifting kind, the kind that seems suspended in the air, in no particular hurry to reach the ground, content to simply exist in the space between sky and earth. The light is fading now, that particular blue-gray of winter twilight. You think about lighting a lamp, but not yet. There's something about this in-between time. Snow actually makes winter nights brighter because its white surface reflects up to 90% of the light that hits it, a property called albedo, compared to dark soil or asphalt which might only reflect 10 to 20%. This means that moonlight, starlight, even the faint glow from your cabin windows, all of it bounces back up from the white expanse rather than being absorbed. On a clear night with a full moon and fresh snow cover, you can often read by the reflected light, or walk through the forest without a flashlight, navigating by the luminescence that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. This is why cross-country skiers and winter campers often prefer moonlit nights for travel. The landscape becomes self-illuminating, creating a soft, shadowless glow that turns the forest into something dreamlike. Fresh snow is especially reflective, before it gets compacted or dirty, so the first night after a snowfall offers the brightest nighttime illumination of all. You take a slow sip of broth. It's rich, almost velvety. Adding a small splash of vinegar or lemon juice to broth while it simmers, usually about a tablespoon per gallon of water, helps extract more minerals from the bones by slightly increasing the acidity, which encourages the release of calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus into the liquid, though you can barely taste it in the final result if you add it early in the cooking process. The acid works gently over the long simmer time, breaking down the bone matrix in a way that pure water alone doesn't accomplish as effectively. It's an old trick, one passed down through generations of winter cooks who knew how to draw every bit of nourishment from what they had, peasant wisdom that modern nutritional science has confirmed. Some cooks swear by apple cider vinegar, others by white wine or lemon juice, but they all serve the same purpose: coaxing minerals from bone into broth. The result is a more nutrient-dense liquid that's especially valuable during winter months when the body craves warming, easily digestible nourishment. Outside, you notice the tracks you made earlier are already beginning to soften. Fresh snow can fall at rates of 1 to 2 inches per hour during a steady snowfall, and in heavier storms, rates can reach 3 or even 4 inches per hour, quickly covering evidence of movement and transforming the landscape continuously. During a prolonged snowstorm, you can watch as the world is rewritten every few hours. A fallen branch disappears beneath a white mound, the corner of the woodshed becomes a soft curve, and yes, your footprints from just an hour ago begin to fill in and blur. By morning, if the snow continues through the night, your path might be entirely erased, the world reset to blankness once again. In the heaviest snowfalls, called whiteouts, in some regions, visibility can drop to just a few feet as the air fills with falling snow and wind redistributes it constantly. There's something peaceful in that gentle erasure, the way winter offers constant renewal, constant quiet beginnings, always ready to provide a fresh canvas. The fire crackles in the wood stove. You'll need to add another log soon, but for now, you simply sit. The broth warms you from the inside. The cabin holds you. And outside, the snow continues its patient, ancient work, building a world of silence, one unique crystal at a time. A single snowstorm can drop anywhere from 40 billion to several trillion individual snowflakes over a given area, depending on the storm's size and duration, with each one representing a small geometry of ice, each one part of this larger transformation. Consider that a moderate snowstorm covering just a few square miles might produce snowflakes numbering in the hundreds of billions. A major winter storm system stretching across several states could involve trillions upon trillions of individual crystals, each one formed in the clouds, each one taking its own unique path to Earth, each one contributing to the collective blanket that will cover fields, forests, and rooftops. The sheer scale of it is humbling, all that delicate complexity, all that crystalline mathematics, happening continuously in the cold air above. You are sitting inside that transformation now, warm and still, while the forest slowly disappears beneath a blanket of white, each flake a tiny miracle joining countless others. You close your eyes and listen. There's almost nothing to hear. And that, you realize, is everything. The evening deepens. You rise from your chair and move to the window, pressing your palm against the cool glass. Outside, the snow has begun to accumulate on the windowsill, building up in a perfect, undisturbed line. You notice how it clings there, defying gravity in its own quiet way. Snow is an exceptional insulator because of the air trapped between its crystals. A fresh snowpack can be up to 90 to 95% air, and this air creates countless tiny pockets that prevent heat from escaping. This is why animals like voles and mice actually burrow beneath the snow to stay warm, creating elaborate tunnel systems in what scientists call the subnivean zone, the space between the ground and the bottom of the snowpack. Down there, even when the air temperature above the snow drops to 0 or below, the temperature often hovers around a relatively comfortable 32 degrees Fahrenheit. The earth below releases residual warmth, and the snow layer acts like a thick blanket, trapping that heat. Indigenous peoples understood this principle for millennia, building snow shelters, igloos and quinzees, that could maintain interior temperatures 40 or 50 degrees warmer than the outside air, even without a fire. The secret isn't the cold of the snow itself, but all that still, trapped air between the crystals, each tiny space acting as a barrier to heat loss. You pull a thick wool blanket around your shoulders and return to your seat. The broth pot still simmers, and you think about adding something to it. Perhaps some wild herbs you dried last autumn, some roots from the cellar. There's an art to building layers of flavor over time. The practice of adding aromatics like onions, carrots, and celery to broth, known as mirepoix in French cooking or soffritto in Italian, isn't just about flavor. These vegetables contain their own beneficial compounds, including antioxidants and anti-inflammatory substances that infuse into the liquid during the long simmer. Onions contribute quercetin, a powerful antioxidant that supports cardiovascular health. Carrots add beta-carotene and other carotenoids that the body can convert to vitamin A. Celery provides apigenin and other phytonutrients with potential anti-inflammatory effects. When you roast these vegetables before adding them to the pot, browning them in a hot oven until their edges caramelize, you trigger the Maillard reaction, which creates hundreds of new flavor compounds that add depth and complexity to the finished broth. Traditional cooks didn't know the chemistry, but they knew that taking the time to properly prepare aromatics, to coax out their sweetness and depth, resulted in a broth that wasn't just nourishing but truly delicious. It's the difference between something you drink for health and something you crave, something that satisfies on multiple levels. You add a few pieces of split wood to the stove, watching as the flames catch and curl around the bark. The wood pops and settles. You've learned which woods burn best, which ones to save for the coldest nights. Different types of wood create different qualities of heat and burn time. Dense hardwoods like oak, maple, and ash burn longer and hotter, producing more BTUs per cord, while softer woods like pine and spruce ignite quickly and burn fast, making them ideal for kindling or quick heat but less efficient for sustaining warmth through a long winter night. Hardwoods have tighter grain and higher density, which means more cellulose packed into each piece, and cellulose is what burns to create heat. A cord of oak might provide 24 to 28 million BTUs of heat, while a cord of pine provides only 15 to 18 million. That's why experienced winter dwellers split and stack their hardwoods for the deep cold months and save their softwoods for shoulder season or for starting fires. There's also the matter of seasoning. Freshly cut, green wood can be 50% water by weight, and burning it means wasting energy evaporating that water instead of heating your home. Properly seasoned wood, dried for at least 6 months to a year, has a moisture content below 20% and burns cleanly and efficiently, with less creosote buildup in the chimney. The ritual of splitting, stacking, and aging your wood is a conversation with time itself, preparing this year for next winter's cold. Outside, you notice the wind has picked up slightly. Not a storm wind, just a gentle movement through the pines. The branches sway, releasing small cascades of snow that shimmer in the fading light. Pine and evergreen trees have evolved several remarkable adaptations to survive heavy snow loads, including flexible branches that bend rather than break, downward sloping limbs that shed snow naturally, and a conical shape that distributes weight efficiently toward the strong central trunk. When snow accumulates on a pine branch, the branch will gradually bend downward under the weight, and this bending motion causes the snow to slide off, a self-clearing mechanism that prevents breakage. The needles themselves are also coated with a waxy cuticle that makes them somewhat water repellent, so snow doesn't stick as readily as it might to broader leaves. Trees with more horizontal branches, like some hardwoods, are more vulnerable to snow damage, which is one reason they've evolved to drop their leaves before winter. Less surface area means less snow accumulation. But the conifers, those ancient evergreens, have refined their architecture over millions of years to live with snow as a constant companion. Even their root systems spread wide and shallow rather than deep, gripping the soil across a broad area to anchor the tree against the combined weight of trunk, branches, and snow load. They are engineers of survival, each one a testament to adaptation. You step to the door and crack it open, just for a moment, letting the cold air rush in. It's sharp and clean, almost painful to breathe deeply, but invigorating. The temperature must have dropped significantly. Cold air holds far less moisture than warm air. In fact, Air at 0 degrees Fahrenheit holds about 95% less water vapor than air at 75 degrees, which is why winter air feels so dry and why static electricity becomes such a problem indoors during cold months. This relationship between temperature and humidity follows what scientists call the Clausius-Clapeyron relation, a principle of thermodynamics that describes how the saturation point of water vapor decreases as temperature drops. When you bring very cold air into a heated cabin and warm it up, the relative humidity plummets, often to 20% or lower, which is drier than many deserts. This extreme dryness can cause chapped lips, dry skin, nosebleeds, and respiratory irritation. It's also why wood furniture can crack in winter. The wood releases moisture to the dry air and shrinks, sometimes splitting along the grain. Traditional solutions include keeping a kettle steaming on the wood stove, hanging wet laundry indoors to dry, or keeping bowls of water near heat sources, all ways of adding moisture back to the parched winter air. You close the door and shake off the cold. Back at the window, you watch the landscape transform as darkness truly arrives. The shapes of trees become silhouettes, suggestions of form rather than detail. Fresh snow appears white because it scatters all wavelengths of visible light equally, reflecting the full spectrum back to our eyes. But very deep or compressed snow can appear blue because ice absorbs slightly more red light than blue, and in thick layers where light penetrates deeply, the red wavelengths are absorbed while blue wavelengths scatter back out. This is the same principle that makes deep ocean water appear blue, and it's why if you dig a deep hole in fresh snow and look into it, or peer into a crevasse on a glacier, you'll see that haunting, ethereal blue color, a color that seems to glow from within. The phenomenon requires some depth. A thin layer of snow will always appear white. But in snowdrifts several feet deep, especially old, compacted snow, light entering the surface travels down through the crystals, and as it bounces around inside that icy matrix, the warmer wavelengths, reds and yellows, get absorbed while the cooler blue wavelengths continue to scatter. It's a color that feels both cold and beautiful, a reminder that even white snow contains hidden dimensions of light. You ladle another cup of broth, this time adding a pinch of sea salt and a grind of black pepper. The salt dissolves instantly, and you consider what it brings to the cup beyond simple taste. Salt has been a precious commodity in winter survival throughout human history, not only as a preservative for meat and fish but because the human body requires sodium to maintain proper fluid balance, nerve function, and muscle contraction, and in cold climates where people sweat less, they can sometimes become deficient if their diet lacks adequate salt. Before modern transportation, salt was so valuable that it was used as currency. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt, giving us the word salary, and entire trade routes formed around salt distribution. In traditional foodways, winter was when preserved foods came into their own: salt-cured hams, salt-packed fish, fermented vegetables and brine, all methods that relied on salt's ability to draw out moisture and create an environment hostile to spoilage bacteria. A pinch of salt in your broth isn't just seasoning, it's part of a deep tradition of making food last, of honoring the preservative power that helped humans survive winters before refrigeration. And that salt on your tongue is also replenishing the electrolytes your body uses to stay warm, to keep your heart beating steadily, to maintain the electrical impulses that fire along your nerves. Outside, a branch cracks somewhere in the distance, not breaking, just the sharp report of wood contracting in the cold. It's a sound you've learned not to startle at, one of winter's regular punctuations. Extreme cold causes materials like wood, metal, and even stones to contract as their molecules move more slowly and pack together more tightly, and this contraction can create loud cracking or popping sounds, sometimes called frost quakes, or cryoseisms when they occur in the ground, as stress builds up and then releases suddenly. Wood in trees contracts differently along the grain versus across it, creating internal stresses that can release with a sharp crack that sounds remarkably like a gunshot. Ice forming rapidly in the ground can create similar phenomena. When water in the soil freezes and expands, it can crack the earth itself, producing a boom that rattles windows and alarms anyone who hasn't experienced it before. In the Arctic, indigenous peoples have long been familiar with these sounds, understanding them as simply the voice of deep cold, the sound of winter tightening its grip. Even the ice on a frozen lake will boom and crack as it expands and contracts with temperature changes, creating eerie groans that seem almost alive. It's the landscape speaking in the language of thermodynamics, every crack and pop a small reminder of the forces at work in the freezing world. You settle deeper into your chair, the blanket warm, the broth warming you from within. The cabin feels smaller now, cozier, as the darkness presses against the windows. This is the heart of winter evening, the long, quiet hours when there's nothing to do but be present, to notice, to rest. The tradition of gathering around fires and sharing warm food and drink during winter evenings has deep psychological and physiological benefits beyond simple warmth. The combination of heat, nourishment, and social connection triggers the release of oxytocin and other bonding hormones, reduces cortisol levels, and can help regulate circadian rhythms that are disrupted by shortened daylight hours. Before electric lights, winter evenings were genuinely long periods of darkness, sometimes 16 hours or more in northern latitudes, and humans evolved ways to cope with this extended night. Gathering together, sharing stories, working on crafts by firelight, these weren't just pastimes but essential practices for mental health and community cohesion. The warmth of fire and warm food creates a sense of safety and comfort that reaches back to our earliest ancestors huddled around flames. Modern research on hygge, the Danish concept of cozy contentment, confirms what traditional cultures always knew: creating warm, comfortable spaces during dark months isn't luxury, it's necessary for well-being. Even if you're alone in a cabin, the ritual of preparing warm broth, tending a fire, wrapping yourself in blankets creates a microenvironment of care that your nervous system recognizes and responds to with calm. You close your eyes and listen again. The fire. Your own breathing. The almost imperceptible whisper of snow against the window glass. The winter night is a kind of meditation, asking nothing, offering everything. The night has fully settled now. You rise to light an oil lamp, the match flaring bright in the darkness before you touch it to the wick. The flame catches, wavers, then steadies into a warm golden glow that pushes back the shadows just enough. Oil lamps and candles have been the primary source of light during winter evenings for most of human history, and the quality of light they produce, in the warm, amber spectrum around 1800 to 2000 Kelvin, is significantly different from modern LED or fluorescent lighting, which can affect our body's production of melatonin in preparation for sleep. This warmer light doesn't suppress melatonin the way blue spectrum light does, which means using oil lamps or candles in the evening allows your body to naturally transition towards sleep as darkness deepens. Before electricity, people's circadian rhythms were more closely aligned with natural day-night cycles, and winter meant genuinely long periods of darkness that the body responded to with increased rest and introspection. The soft, flickering light of a flame also creates a meditative quality that steady electric light lacks. Your eyes are drawn to the movement, the dance of the flame, in a way that's both alerting and calming. Historically, different oils produce different qualities of light. Whale oil burned bright and clean, olive oil was dimmer but readily available in Mediterranean regions, and kerosene, once it was developed in the mid-1800s, revolutionized indoor lighting with its bright, steady flame. The simple act of lighting a lamp becomes a ritual marking the transition from day to evening, from activity to rest. You settle back down, pulling a handmade quilt over your lap. It's pieced together from old fabrics, each square a different pattern, a different memory. Your fingers trace the stitching absently. Quilts and layered bedding were essential survival technology in unheated or minimally heated bedrooms, and the effectiveness of a quilt comes not from the fabric itself but from the air trapped between layers. Traditional quilts use batting made from cotton, wool, or down, and these materials work because their fibers create millions of tiny air pockets that prevent heat transfer. A well-made quilt can provide the same insulation as several flat blankets while weighing significantly less, because it's really the loft, the thickness and fluffiness, that creates warmth. Down from geese and ducks is particularly effective because each feather has hundreds of tiny filaments branching off from the central shaft, and these filaments tangle together to trap air while remaining incredibly light. Wool has different properties. Each fiber has a crimped, scaly structure that also traps air, but wool has the added benefit of remaining warm even when damp, because the fiber itself can absorb moisture without feeling wet, and the process of absorption actually generates a small amount of heat. In many traditional cultures, the making of quilts was communal work. Quilting bees where women would gather to piece together tops and stitch through the layers, sharing stories and strengthening bonds while creating these essential household items. Each quilt represented hours of careful work, and they were often given as wedding gifts or passed down through generations, becoming repositories of family history stitched in fabric. Outside, you hear a sound, a soft hooting that drifts through the cold air. An owl, somewhere in the darkness of the forest. Owls are among the few predators that remain active hunters throughout winter nights, and they've evolved extraordinary adaptations for hunting in darkness and snow, including asymmetrical ear placement that allows them to pinpoint prey beneath the snow by sound alone, and specialized feather structures that make their flight nearly silent. The great gray owl, for instance, can hear a vole moving under 2 feet of snow and will plunge through the snow to catch it, guided entirely by sound. Their facial discs, those distinctive heart-shaped or round arrangements of feathers around their eyes, actually function like parabolic reflectors, channeling sound waves toward their ears with remarkable efficiency. One ear is often positioned slightly higher than the other, which allows the owl to determine not just the direction of a sound but also its precise elevation and distance. The leading edges of their primary flight feathers have a comb-like structure that breaks up the turbulence of air passing over the wing, eliminating the whistling sound that other birds make in flight. This silence is crucial. It prevents prey from hearing the owl's approach, but it also allows the owl to continue hearing the tiny sounds of prey movement even as it flies. In the winter landscape, where small mammals tunnel beneath the snow and songbirds are scarce, this combination of exceptional hearing and silent flight makes owls supremely adapted hunters of the cold months. You add a handful of dried mushrooms to your broth pot, watching them bob and slowly begin to rehydrate in the simmering liquid. Mushrooms, both fresh and dried, add a deep, savory quality to broths through naturally occurring compounds called glutamates, which create what's known as umami, the fifth basic taste alongside sweet, sour, salty, and bitter, and dried mushrooms are particularly concentrated in these flavor compounds because the drying process intensifies their taste. Shiitake, porcini, and other wild mushrooms contain high levels of guanosine monophosphate and other nucleotides that, when combined with the glutamates naturally present in meat broths, create a synergistic effect that makes the overall flavor exponentially more savory and satisfying. This is why traditional cooking across many cultures, from French to Japanese to Eastern European, incorporates dried mushrooms into winter soups and stews. Beyond flavor, mushrooms contribute important nutrients, B vitamins, selenium, potassium, and in some varieties like maitake and shiitake, compounds called beta-glucans that support immune function. Dried mushrooms also have the advantage of being shelf-stable, making them an ideal winter ingredient in the days before refrigeration. The process of drying mushrooms concentrates not just their flavor but also their nutritional value per unit of weight. When you add them to hot broth, they rehydrate and release all those concentrated flavors and nutrients back into the liquid, creating layers of depth that fresh mushrooms alone might not achieve. It's an ancient form of food preservation that transforms a perishable autumn harvest into a winter staple. You notice frost beginning to form on the inside corners of the windows, delicate feathers of ice spreading across the glass in intricate patterns. Window frost, also called fern frost or ice flowers, forms when indoor humidity contacts extremely cold window glass, and the patterns that develop, those elaborate branching structures, follow the same principles as snowflake formation, growing along crystalline pathways determined by microscopic imperfections in the glass surface. The frost typically starts at a tiny scratch, dust particle, or other nucleation point on the glass, and from there, ice crystals spread outward in dendritic patterns, tree-like structures that branch and rebranch in increasingly complex designs. The exact pattern depends on several factors: the temperature difference between inside and outside, the humidity level in the room, air currents along the window surface, and the microscopic topography of the glass itself. In old houses with single-pane windows and higher indoor humidity from cooking and breathing, elaborate frost patterns were common sights on winter mornings. Each window would display its own unique frost garden, and children would press their warm hands against the glass to melt clear spots to look through. Modern double-pane windows and controlled humidity levels mean this phenomenon is less common now, but when conditions align, very cold nights, older windows, humidity from cooking or a kettle, the frost still appears, a reminder that ice wants to make art, to follow mathematical rules of crystal formation into something beautiful. By morning, when sunlight hits the window, the frost will sublime, transform directly from solid ice to water vapor without melting, and disappear, leaving the glass clear again. The wind picks up outside, not quite a howl but a steady presence now, and you can hear it moving through different parts of the forest, a lower note through the bare hardwoods, a higher whisper through the pines. Wind moving through different types of trees and terrain creates distinct sounds that experienced outdoor people can read like a language, with dense evergreen forests producing a rushing, shushing sound as wind moves through millions of needles, while bare deciduous branches create a rattling, clicking percussion, and open fields generate a smooth, uninterrupted whoosh. This variation happens because each type of vegetation interacts with moving air differently. Pine needles are thin and flexible, and they vibrate at high frequencies when wind passes through them, creating that characteristic sigh or whisper. Bare branches, being stiffer and more rigid, knock against each other and create sharper, more percussive sounds. In dense forest, wind is also slowed and fragmented by the layers of vegetation, so you hear it build and fade as gusts move through, creating waves of sound. Indigenous peoples and traditional hunters learned to read these wind sounds to understand approaching weather changes. A sudden shift in wind direction or intensity often precedes a weather front, and being able to hear those changes and how the forest sounds can provide advance warning. Even the pitch of the wind can tell you something about temperature. Very cold air is denser and can create different resonances than warmer air. Sitting in a cabin and listening to wind move through the landscape is like listening to an orchestra, each section playing its part, the whole creating a complex symphony of the winter night. You stir the broth and taste it, considering what it needs. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps it's complete as it is, simple, honest, warm. The concept of enough in cooking, knowing when to stop adding, when a dish is complete, is a skill that develops over time and connects to broader principles of satisfaction and contentment, particularly relevant in winter when resources might be limited and the goal is nourishment rather than elaborate presentation. In traditional foodways, especially in peasant and rural cooking, meals were built from what was available, and the art was in coaxing maximum flavor and nutrition from minimal ingredients. A good broth didn't need 10 ingredients, it needed the right ingredients treated with care and time. This philosophy extends beyond cooking to the winter mindset itself, the understanding that simplicity can be profound, that doing a few things well is more satisfying than doing many things poorly. Japanese aesthetics have a concept called kanso, or simplicity, which values the elimination of the unnecessary to reveal essential beauty. A bowl of well-made broth with just salt and herbs embodies this principle. It's complete because nothing is lacking, not because nothing could be added. Learning to recognize sufficiency, to feel satisfied rather than always reaching for more, is perhaps one of winter's deepest lessons, in food, in warmth, in the quiet hours of a long evening. You set down your bowl and flex your fingers, noticing how the warmth of the broth has loosened them, made them more supple. Earlier, they were stiff with cold. Cold temperatures cause blood vessels in extremities like fingers and toes to constrict in a process called vasoconstriction, which reduces blood flow to these areas to preserve heat in the body's core where vital organs are located. This is an automatic survival response, but it means hands and feet can become numb and lose dexterity in cold conditions. When your core temperature is stable and you're not in danger of hypothermia, you can encourage blood flow back to your hands by warming them gradually, which is why holding a warm cup is so satisfying and effective. The warmth causes the blood vessels to dilate again, allowing warm blood to flow back into the fingers. This process can create a tingling sensation sometimes called the hot aches, as nerves wake back up and normal circulation returns. Repeatedly exposing hands to cold and then rewarming them, as people who work outdoors in winter do regularly, can actually improve circulation over time, a process called cold adaptation or acclimatization. Some winter workers, like ice fishermen and ski instructors, develop notably better circulation in their extremities than people who stay primarily indoors. There's also a phenomenon called cold-induced vasodilation, where, after prolonged cold exposure, the body periodically allows warm blood to flush through the extremities to prevent tissue damage, which is why experienced winter hikers know that cold fingers will sometimes suddenly feel warmer for a few minutes before getting cold again. It's your body's way of protecting itself, rhythmically pulsing warmth to the edges to keep frostbite at bay. The lamp flame flickers slightly, a draft from somewhere, perhaps around the door frame. You make a mental note to check the weather stripping tomorrow. Small air leaks around doors, windows, and other openings can account for 25 to 40% of heat loss in a cabin or house, and traditional methods of sealing these gaps, using wool felt, rope caulking, or even moss and clay, were essential skills for winter survival in the days before modern insulation and weather stripping. In Scandinavian countries, builders would pack moss between logs during construction, as it was abundant, freely available, and naturally resistant to decay. As the moss dried, it compacted into a remarkably effective seal that would last for decades. Rope caulking, twisted fiber rope hammered into the gaps between planks or logs, served a similar purpose and could be replaced as needed. Some traditional builders used a mixture of clay and straw or horsehair, which could be pushed into gaps and would harden into a durable seal. The principle in all these methods is the same: stop air movement. Still air is a good insulator. Moving air strips heat away through convection. Even a tiny gap can create a surprising amount of heat loss if cold outside air is constantly flowing in while warm inside air escapes. This is why the old practice of hanging heavy curtains over doors and windows at night wasn't just decorative. Thick fabric creates a dead air space between the curtain and the window, adding another layer of insulation. Every small effort to seal and insulate compounds into significant heat retention, which in turn means less fuel needed to stay warm, fewer trees to cut, less work overall. Efficiency in winter isn't just practical, it's a form of respect for your resources and your labor. You lean back and close your eyes, letting the sounds and warmth wash over you. This is winter's gift, the permission, even the requirement, to slow down, to do less, to simply be. You open your eyes and gaze into the broth pot once more, watching the gentle bubbles rise and break at the surface. There's something hypnotic about it, the way the liquid moves in slow, circular currents. The gentle simmer of a properly made broth, with just a few bubbles breaking the surface rather than a rolling boil, is crucial because high heat can break down proteins too aggressively, creating a cloudy broth and driving off volatile aromatic compounds, while a low simmer between 180 and 200 degrees Fahrenheit allows collagen to dissolve slowly into gelatin while preserving delicate flavors and creating a clear, clean-tasting liquid. Professional chefs often say that a stockpot should smile, rather than laugh, meaning you should see gentle movement and the occasional bubble rising lazily to the surface, not vigorous boiling. When broth boils hard, the agitation emulsifies fat and protein particles throughout the liquid, which is why some broths turn murky and greasy. A gentle simmer keeps the fat floating on top where it can be skimmed away, and allows impurities to coagulate and rise to the surface as foam, also to be skimmed. This patient, low-temperature cooking also prevents toughening of any meat left on the bones and ensures that delicate flavor compounds, many of which are volatile and can evaporate at high temperatures, remain in the liquid. Traditional cooks who tended broths on wood stoves understood this intuitively, moving the pot to cooler parts of the stove's surface or adjusting dampers to maintain that perfect gentle simmer. It's a form of cooking that can't be rushed, that requires patience and attention over hours, and that reward is a broth that's both nourishing and transcendent in its clarity and depth of flavor. You stand and stretch, feeling your spine pop softly, then walk to the small bookshelf in the corner. Your fingers trail across the spines. Old friends, these books, read and reread through many winters. Reading by lamplight or firelight was the primary form of evening entertainment and education for centuries, and the practice of reading slowly, without the distractions of screens or notifications, engages the brain differently than modern scrolling or skimming. It activates deeper comprehension, strengthens focus, and can induce a meditative state that promotes both learning and relaxation. Before electric light extended the productive day artificially, people's reading time was naturally limited to daylight hours or the few precious hours of lamplight in the evening, which made reading a more intentional, valued activity. You chose your books carefully, read them thoroughly, often multiple times. The physical act of holding a book, turning pages, seeing your progress through a text, all of this creates a different relationship with the material than reading on a screen. Studies have shown that people retain information better from physical books than digital text, possibly because the tactile experience creates additional memory anchors. You remember where on the page you read something, whether it was left or right, top or bottom. In the quietness of a winter cabin, without the electromagnetic buzz of devices or the temptation of infinite content, reading becomes fully immersive. Your attention doesn't fragment. You enter the world of the book completely, and time becomes fluid, measured not by clocks but by chapters, by the progress of the narrative, by the burning down of the lamp oil or the consumption of the firewood. You select a familiar volume, poetry perhaps, or natural history, and return to your chair. But before you open it, you glance out the window again and notice something that makes you pause. The night sky during winter is often remarkably clearer and shows more stars than summer skies because cold air holds less moisture and therefore less haze, and winter nights in the northern hemisphere orient us towards some of the brightest constellations and stars in the entire sky, including Orion, Sirius, and the Pleiades cluster. The crisp, dry air of a cold winter night has fewer water droplets and particles to scatter light, which means starlight passes through the atmosphere with less interference, appearing sharper and brighter. Additionally, winter air tends to be more stable, with less turbulence, which reduces the twinkling effect and allows for steadier viewing. The constellations visible in winter: Orion the hunter with his distinctive belt, Taurus the bull with the orange giant star Aldebaran, Gemini the twins, and Canis Major with brilliant Sirius, the brightest star in our night sky. These are among the most luminous and dramatic stellar arrangements visible from Earth. Ancient peoples organized their lives partly by these winter stars, using them for navigation, for timing agricultural activities, for storytelling that passed down cultural knowledge. On a clear, moonless winter night, far from city lights, you can see not just hundreds but thousands of stars, the Milky Way stretching overhead like a river of light, and if you're patient, the occasional meteor streaking across the darkness. The cold that makes you hurry indoors also polishes the sky to crystal clarity. You set the book aside for a moment and think about venturing outside, just briefly, to see the stars. But the warmth holds you, and instead, you imagine them, those distant fires burning in the frozen dark. Stars themselves are actually the source of nearly every element in your body and in the earth itself. The carbon in your bones, the iron in your blood, the calcium in your teeth were all forged in the nuclear furnaces of ancient stars that exploded as supernovae billions of years ago, scattering these elements into space where they eventually coalesced into our solar system. The hydrogen in your body is original to the Big Bang, but almost everything else, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and all the metals and minerals, came from stars. When a massive star exhausts its nuclear fuel, it collapses and then explodes with such violence that the extreme temperatures and pressures create elements heavier than iron, elements that can't be forged in normal stellar burning. These explosions seed the universe with the building blocks of planets and life. So when you look up at the winter stars, you're looking at your own distant relatives, the cosmic ancestors whose deaths made your existence possible. Every atom in the wood burning in your stove, every molecule in the broth you're drinking, every cell in your body is stardust, literally, not metaphorically. This knowledge, this cosmic perspective, can make even a small cabin in a snowy forest feel connected to something vast and ancient. You are the universe experiencing itself, a temporary arrangement of stellar debris that has somehow become conscious, aware, capable of wonder. You shake your head slightly, smiling at the enormity of that thought, and bring yourself back to the immediate: the lamp, the fire, the cabin walls around you. Sometimes the mind needs to travel to the edge of everything to appreciate the here and now. The practice of returning attention to the present moment, to immediate sensory experience, is the foundation of mindfulness meditation, and winter's enforced stillness and silence create natural conditions for this kind of awareness. The Japanese concept of ma refers to the meaningful silence or emptiness between things, and winter is a season of ma, of spaciousness and pause. In traditional Buddhist practice, meditation halls are often unheated or minimally heated, because the mild discomfort of cold helps practitioners stay alert and present rather than becoming drowsy. The stillness of winter, fewer birds calling, less insect noise, muffled sounds from snow cover, creates an environment where you can hear your own thoughts more clearly, notice your breathing, feel the subtle sensations in your body. This isn't always comfortable. Without distraction, you also notice worries, anxieties, the restlessness of your own mind. But there's value in that noticing, in developing the capacity to observe your thoughts without being swept away by them. Winter cabin life, with its limited external stimulation and long quiet hours, becomes a kind of informal retreat, an opportunity to develop what Buddhists call witness consciousness, the ability to watch your own experience with some distance and compassion. Even the simple act of sitting with a warm cup and listening to wind and fire is a meditation if you bring your full attention to it, if you notice when your mind wanders and gently return it to the sensory present. The fire has burned down somewhat. You open the stove door and add 2 more pieces of wood, arranging them carefully to allow air flow, watching as the flames lick around the new fuel and begin to catch. The art of building and maintaining a fire is one of humanity's oldest skills, and understanding the fire triangle, fuel, oxygen, and heat, allows you to control the burn rate, heat output, and duration of your fire by adjusting how you arrange the wood and manage the air flow through dampers and vents. Fuel is the wood itself. Oxygen comes from air moving through the firebox. Heat is the combustion temperature that sustains the reaction. All 3 must be present in the right proportions for fire to burn efficiently. If you pack wood too tightly, you starve the fire of oxygen and it smolders, producing lots of smoke and creosote but little heat. If you leave too much space between logs, heat escapes and the fire burns inefficiently. The ideal arrangement depends on what you want. A hot, fast fire for quick heat requires smaller pieces with good air space between them, oriented to catch draft efficiently. A long-lasting overnight fire requires larger pieces of dense hardwood arranged more closely, with dampers adjusted to restrict oxygen and slow the burn. The position of wood matters too. Horizontal logs burn more slowly than vertical ones because less surface area is exposed to flames at once. Traditional knowledge of fire building was passed down carefully because it could mean the difference between survival and freezing, between efficient use of precious fuel and waste. Modern people often lose this knowledge, relying on thermostats and central heating, but in a cabin heated only by wood, you develop an intimate relationship with fire, learning to read the flames, to know by the sound and color whether your fire is burning cleanly or needs adjustment. You close the stove door and watch through the glass as the new wood catches fully, flames dancing around it in yellow and orange waves. There's something primal in this watching, something that satisfies deep in your brain. Humans are drawn to watching fire in a way that seems hardwired into our psychology. Studies have shown that staring at flames reduces blood pressure, induces relaxation, and can trigger a light meditative or trance state, likely because fire meant safety, warmth, and community for hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. Before we were fully human, our ancestors gathered around fires. Fire extended the day, allowed cooking which made more nutrients available and may have contributed to brain development, protected from predators, and created a social center where stories were told and bonds were strengthened. The part of our brain that relaxes when we watch flames is ancient, preverbal, connected to deep survival instincts. Fire watching also exhibits characteristics of what researchers call soft fascination. It holds attention without requiring focused concentration, allowing the mind to rest and wander while remaining gently engaged. This is different from hard fascination, like watching television or scrolling social media, which demands active attention and can be mentally exhausting. The random, ever-changing patterns of flames provide visual interest that never quite repeats, following mathematical principles of chaos and turbulence that the eye finds endlessly engaging. No wonder people can stare into campfires or hearth fires for hours, feeling peaceful and content, thoughts drifting in and out like the flames themselves. You realize you're hungry, not ravenously so, but with that gentle, pleasant hunger that comes from spending a quiet day in the cold. You consider what you might add to your broth to make it a fuller meal. Traditional winter meals often featured one-pot cooking where a basic broth or stew would be enriched throughout the day with whatever ingredients were available: leftover grains, root vegetables, bits of preserved meat, dried legumes, creating what food historians call perpetual stew, or hunter's pot, which had the advantage of continuous availability, enhanced flavor through layering, and minimal fuel used since the pot never fully cooled. In medieval European households, a cauldron might hang over the fire constantly, with new ingredients added as they became available and portions ladled out as needed. The perpetual warmth prevented spoilage, and the continuous cooking melded flavors in ways that single-session cooking couldn't achieve. In Chinese cuisine, this tradition appears in master stock, a broth that's maintained for years or even generations, with each use adding depth and complexity. The practice makes practical sense when fuel is scarce and fires are laborious to start. Why cool down and rebuild when you can maintain a gentle heat? It also creates flexibility in meal timing. In an era before clocks and rigid schedules, people ate when hungry and when work allowed, and having food always ready simplified life. Nutritionally, this continuous cooking can extract maximum nutrients from bones and vegetables, and the practice of adding fresh ingredients to an established base means you're constantly inoculating new food with the beneficial bacteria and enzymes from the previous batch, similar to sourdough starter principles. It's a living pot, evolving day by day. You reach for a small basket of root vegetables, carrots, parsnips, a turnip, and begin to scrub and chop them, the rhythmic work satisfying in its simplicity. Root vegetables like carrots, parsnips, turnips, and beets actually become sweeter after exposure to cold temperatures because the plants convert stored starches into sugars as a natural antifreeze mechanism, which is why winter-harvested roots are often more flavorful than those harvested in fall, and why traditional root cellars kept vegetables cool but not frozen. When a root vegetable is exposed to near-freezing temperatures, the plant cells respond by breaking down complex carbohydrates into simple sugars, which lower the freezing point of the cell sap and prevent ice crystals from forming and rupturing cell walls. This survival mechanism has the happy side effect of making the vegetables taste noticeably sweeter and more complex. Carrots pulled after the first frost can taste almost candy-like compared to summer carrots. Parsnips are traditionally not even harvested until after frost for exactly this reason. Gardeners in cold climates know to leave some root crops in the ground through early winter, protected by mulch, and harvest them as needed. They'll keep better in the frozen ground than in storage, and they'll taste better too. The root cellar, typically a cool, humid, dark space that stays above freezing but below 50 degrees, recreates these conditions artificially, keeping roots dormant and fresh for months. Before industrial food systems, a well-stocked root cellar was the difference between adequate winter nutrition and scurvy-inducing deprivation. These humble vegetables, earthy and unglamorous, were treasures. The vegetables go into the pot, sinking into the golden broth, and you give it all a gentle stir before replacing the lid. In 20 minutes or so, they'll be tender, infused with the broth's flavor while contributing their own sweetness. You settle back into your chair once more, the book in your lap, and this time you open it. The pages are soft with age, the margins marked with notes from previous readings. Outside, the snow continues to fall, steady and patient, building the white world deeper. You read for a while, the words washing over you in that particular way that happens when you're warm and fed and the world outside is cold. The lamp flame casts a steady circle of light, and beyond it, the cabin recedes into gentle shadow. The act of handwriting notes in the margins of books, a practice called marginalia, creates a dialogue between reader and text that deepens comprehension and memory, And many famous thinkers from Samuel Taylor Coleridge to Mark Twain were prolific annotators whose margin notes have become valuable historical documents revealing how they engaged with ideas. When you write in the margins, you're forced to synthesize your thoughts into brief, clear statements, a form of active learning that passive reading doesn't require. The physical act of writing also creates motor memory that reinforces the cognitive processing of the content. Your margin notes become a record of who you were when you read this passage, what you were thinking about, what resonated or troubled you. Returning to a book years later and finding your own notes is like meeting your past self, seeing how your thinking has evolved or, sometimes, how certain insights remain constant. In the era before widespread literacy, books themselves were precious objects, and the margins were the only space available for readers to record their responses. Medieval monks filled margins with elaborate illustrations and commentary. Renaissance scholars created dense networks of cross-references and arguments in their margins. This tradition of marginalia creates layered texts where multiple voices, author, reader, and often subsequent readers, exist in conversation across years or centuries. In a winter cabin, with time to read slowly and think deeply, your margin notes become part of the cabin's intellectual life, thoughts captured and preserved like flowers pressed between pages. You set the book aside and stand to check the broth. The vegetables have softened, their colors deepened. You fish out a piece of carrot and taste it, tender, sweet, infused with the rich flavor of the stock. The Maillard reaction, the chemical process that creates brown, caramelized flavors when foods are roasted or seared at high heat, doesn't occur in boiling or simmering liquid because the temperature never exceeds 212 degrees Fahrenheit, which is why vegetables simmered in broth have a different, cleaner flavor than roasted vegetables, and why combining both techniques creates the most complex, satisfying dishes. The Maillard reaction requires temperatures above 280 degrees Fahrenheit to begin occurring efficiently, which is why you roast vegetables in a hot oven or sear meat in a pan before adding liquid. This reaction involves amino acids and reducing sugars combining to form hundreds of new flavor and aroma compounds, the savory, slightly sweet, nutty, toasted notes that make roasted foods so appealing. When you combine this with the gentle extraction of flavors that happens in simmering, you get layers of taste that neither technique alone can achieve. This is why traditional recipes often call for browning meat before making stew, or roasting bones before making stock. You're building flavor in stages, using different cooking methods to access different chemical transformations. The roasted, caramelized notes provide depth and richness. The slow simmering provides clarity and integration. Together, they create something greater than the sum of their parts, a principle that applies to cooking but also to life. Different approaches, different techniques, each valuable, combined thoughtfully to create complexity and satisfaction. A log in the stove shifts and settles with a soft thump. You glance at the wood box and estimate you have enough to get through the night without going out to the woodshed. That's its own kind of comfort. Strategic wood stacking, keeping multiple days' worth of firewood inside the cabin to dry and warm before burning, significantly improves heating efficiency because wood at room temperature ignites more quickly, burns more cleanly, and produces more usable heat than wood brought directly from freezing outdoor storage. When you bring frozen or very cold wood to a fire, the stove must first warm that wood to room temperature, then drive off any surface moisture, before the wood can actually begin to combust, all of which consumes energy that could otherwise be heating your space. Room temperature wood starts burning almost immediately, and dry wood burns hotter and more completely than damp wood. Traditional cabin designs often included wood storage areas built into the living space, a wood box beside the stove, or even a small room where wood could be stacked within the building envelope. This served multiple purposes. It dried the wood, it pre-warmed it, and it acted as additional thermal mass that helped moderate temperature swings. The practice of rotating your wood supply, bringing in tomorrow's wood today, burning today's wood that you brought in yesterday, becomes a rhythm, a daily ritual that keeps you connected to the fuel that keeps you warm. You learn to judge by feel how dry a piece of wood is, how well it will burn. You develop preferences for different species for different purposes. The wood becomes not just fuel but a relationship, something you tend and manage with attention and care. You pour yourself another cup of broth, this time ladling some of the vegetables into the cup as well. The parsnip is particularly good, almost buttery in texture, its natural sweetness enhanced by the long, slow cooking. Parsnips, which look like pale carrots and are members of the same plant family, have a fascinating history. They were a staple food in Europe before potatoes arrived from the Americas, serving the same dietary role that potatoes would later fill, and they contain natural compounds including phyllcarinol and other polyacetylenes that have demonstrated anti-cancer and anti-inflammatory properties in research studies. The Romans cultivated parsnips both for food and medicine, and throughout medieval Europe, parsnips appeared in everything from stews to breads to desserts. Yes, sweet parsnip cakes were common because of the root's natural sugar content, especially after frost. When potatoes were introduced in the 16th and 17th centuries, they gradually displaced parsnips as the primary starch crop because potatoes produced higher yields and were more versatile in cooking. But parsnips never entirely disappeared, especially in regions with cold winters where their frost-sweetening quality was valued. Modern nutritional analysis shows parsnips are rich in fiber, vitamin C, folate, and various minerals, and those polyacetylene compounds that give parsnips their distinctive, slightly spicy sweet flavor are also being studied for their potential health benefits. There's something satisfying about eating a vegetable that your ancestors might have eaten 1,000 years ago, prepared in essentially the same way, pulled from cold storage, simmered until tender, savored on a winter night. It's a direct connection across centuries, the same flavors, the same comfort. Outside, you hear that cracking sound again, a tree, or perhaps ice forming in the ground. The temperature must still be dropping as the night deepens. When temperatures drop very rapidly, 10 or more degrees within an hour or two, it can create a phenomenon called a temperature inversion where cold, dense air sinks into valleys and low areas while warmer air rises and sits above it like a lid, trapping the cold air below, and sometimes creating temperature differences of 20 or 30 degrees between valley floor and hilltop. This inversion layer can persist for days during stable high-pressure winter weather, and it has significant effects on both comfort and air quality. If you're in the valley, you might be experiencing sub-zero temperatures while someone just a few hundred feet higher in elevation is dealing with temperatures well above freezing. Fog and ice crystals can form at the boundary between the cold and warm layers, creating eerie visual effects. Wood smoke and other pollutants get trapped under the inversion layer, unable to disperse upward, which is why some mountain valleys develop significant air quality problems in winter when everyone is heating with wood. Indigenous peoples understood these patterns and often located winter camps strategically, not in the deepest valleys where cold air pooled, but on benches or slopes above the valley floor where temperatures were more moderate and air circulated better. Modern mountain towns still deal with inversion challenges, sometimes experiencing weeks of cold, stagnant air while nearby peaks bask in sunshine and relative warmth. It's a reminder that temperature is not uniform, that the landscape itself shapes the cold, creates microclimates and variations that careful observation can reveal and allow you to adapt to. You wrap your hands around the warm cup and think about the difference between inside and outside, between the small sphere of warmth you've created here and the vast cold beyond the walls. The concept of thermal comfort is complex and involves not just air temperature but also radiant heat, humidity, air movement, clothing, and metabolic rate, which is why you can feel comfortable at 60 degrees near a fire but cold at 65 degrees in a room with no radiant heat source, and why traditional homes were designed around radiant heat from masonry stoves or fireplaces rather than heated air. Air temperature is only one factor in how warm you feel. Radiant heat, the infrared energy emitted by warm surfaces like a wood stove, a fire, or even sun-warmed walls, warms your body directly without first warming the air. This is why you can sit comfortably by a fire even when the room's air temperature is quite cool. One side of your body receives intense radiant heat, while the other side might be exposed to much cooler air. Masonry heaters, traditional in Scandinavia, Russia, and parts of Central Europe, are designed specifically to maximize this effect. They absorb heat from a hot fire burned for a short period, then radiate that heat slowly over 12 to 24 hours, creating gentle, even warmth that feels more comfortable than forced air heating at the same temperature. Humidity also affects comfort. Dry air allows moisture to evaporate more quickly from your skin, which has a cooling effect, so you might need the air temperature several degrees warmer in dry winter conditions to feel as warm as you would in more humid conditions. Traditional builders understood all of this intuitively, designing homes with thick walls that absorbed and radiated heat, with alcoves and inglenooks where people could sit close to the heat source, with layouts that created zones of different temperatures for different activities. The lamp oil is getting low. You make a mental note to refill it before bed, but for now, there's still plenty of light. The flame has burned down to a steady, even glow. Different types of lamp oil produce different qualities of light and have different burning characteristics. Traditional oils like whale oil, olive oil, and later kerosene each had advantages and disadvantages, and the transition from one to another represented significant technological and economic shifts. Whale oil, particularly spermaceti oil from sperm whales, was prized because it burned bright, clean, and relatively odorless, but it was expensive and its procurement drove the whale populations toward collapse in the 19th century. Olive oil was used around the Mediterranean for millennia, but it burned dimmer and smokier than whale oil, and it was primarily a food source, making it costly to use for lighting. Kerosene, refined from petroleum starting in the 1850s, revolutionized lighting because it was cheap, burned brightly, and was relatively safe when used properly. The development of kerosene lamps with glass chimneys that controlled airflow allowed for bright, steady flames that transformed evening life for millions of people. Modern lamp oil is highly refined and often contains additives to reduce smoke and odor, but the basic principle remains the same as it has been for thousands of years. A wick draws liquid fuel upward through capillary action, the fuel vaporizes at the flame tip, and the vapor combusts to produce light and heat. There's something profound about using a technology that would be recognizable to someone from the ancient world, a form of light that humans have relied on for so long that it feels archetypal, essential. You rise and stretch again, walking to the small window on the east side of the cabin. Tomorrow, the sun will rise there, though in deep winter, it rises late and sets early, the arc across the sky low and brief. The winter solstice marks the shortest day and longest night of the year, and at northern latitudes, the difference between summer and winter day length can be extreme. In Fairbanks, Alaska, the sun is up for nearly 22 hours at summer solstice but only about 3.5 hours at winter solstice, a dramatic swing that profoundly affects all aspects of life. Even at more moderate latitudes, the changes are significant. The tilt of Earth's axis, about 23.5 degrees, means that during Northern Hemisphere winter, the North Pole tilts away from the Sun, causing the Sun to trace a low arc across the southern sky and resulting in weak, indirect sunlight and short days. The solstice itself, from Latin words meaning sun stands still, refers to the moment when the Sun reaches its lowest point in the sky and then begins its journey back toward longer days. Cultures around the world have marked this turning point with festivals and rituals: the Roman Saturnalia, Scandinavian Yule, Chinese Dongji, Iranian Yalda, and many others. The solstice represents both the deepest darkness and the promise of returning light, death and rebirth, ending and beginning. After solstice, each day grows incrementally longer, though the coldest weather is usually still ahead. The earth and oceans take time to release their stored heat, creating a lag between shortest day and coldest temperatures. But psychologically, knowing that light is returning, that the balance has tipped back towards spring, provides comfort during the deep winter weeks. You return to your chair and pick up the book again. Outside, the snow continues its work. Inside, the fire burns steady. The night is long, but you have light, warmth, food. You have everything you need. You find yourself reading the same paragraph twice, not because you don't understand it, but because your mind has drifted pleasantly, following its own threads of thought. This is the gift of unhurried time, the permission to let attention wander and return without guilt. The human brain operates differently in states of relaxation versus states of focused productivity, with the default mode network becoming active during rest and mind wandering. This network, which includes regions throughout the brain, is responsible for creativity, memory consolidation, self-reflection, and the integration of experiences into coherent personal narratives. When you're actively focused on a task, certain brain regions activate while others quiet down. But when you relax and let your mind drift, staring into fire, watching snow fall, or reading without pressure, the default mode network engages, making unexpected connections between ideas, processing emotions, and essentially organizing your mental life. This is why people often have their best insights in the shower, on walks, or just before sleep. The relaxed state allows the brain to work on problems in the background, making associations that focused thinking might miss. Winter's long, quiet evenings naturally encourage this state. Without the stimulation of screens or busy schedules, your mind has space to wander, to digest the day, to make meaning from experience. Traditional cultures built this kind of reflective time into daily life through storytelling, handwork, and communal sitting. Modern neuroscience confirms what wisdom traditions always knew: the mind needs both focus and drift, both productivity and rest, to function optimally. In a sense, doing nothing is doing something essential. You close the book and set it on the small table beside you, then lean back and simply listen. The cabin has its own soundscape. The fires crackle and pop, the occasional tick of expanding or contracting wood, the wind outside. Wood expands when it absorbs moisture and contracts when it dries, a property called dimensional movement, and this constant adjustment to humidity levels is what causes the creaking, ticking, and popping sounds in wooden buildings, especially noticeable at night when temperature changes and when the building quiets down enough for subtle sounds to be heard. Each board, beam, and joist is constantly responding to moisture in the air. In winter, when indoor air is dry from heating, wood releases moisture and shrinks slightly. Nails remain the same size while the wood around them shrinks, which can cause small movements and sounds. Joints that were tight in humid summer become slightly loose in dry winter. This is also why doors and drawers that stuck in summer often move freely in winter, and why gaps can appear between floorboards. Traditional timber frame construction with wooden pegs rather than metal fasteners actually accommodates this movement better than modern construction. The wooden pegs expand and contract along with the surrounding timber, maintaining their grip. Japanese temple builders mastered this principle centuries ago, creating structures that could flex and move with seasonal changes and even earthquakes, lasting for hundreds of years. The sounds of a wooden building at night are the house breathing, adjusting, settling, not signs of structural problems but evidence of wood's living relationship with its environment. Learning to distinguish between normal settling sounds and sounds that might indicate actual problems is part of developing a relationship with your dwelling place. You notice the oil lamp flickering slightly more now, definitely running low. You retrieve the oil can from the shelf and carefully refill the reservoir, the familiar smell of the oil rising briefly before you cap the can and return it to its place. The development of standardized lamp oil and the infrastructure to distribute it widely represents a significant chapter in industrial history. Before the petroleum industry created reliable, affordable kerosene, most people's access to light after dark was limited to candles, rush lights, or expensive oils. And the ability to extend the productive and social day through better lighting had profound effects on literacy, education, and quality of life. In the early 19th century, reading and detailed work after dark were luxuries available primarily to the wealthy who could afford good candles or expensive whale oil. The development of kerosene refining in the 1850s and its rapid distribution through rail and shipping networks meant that by the 1860s and 1870s, even rural and working-class families could afford lamp oil. This democratization of light enabled evening schools for workers, allowed farmers to maintain equipment and plan their work after dark, gave families more time together, and supported the spread of literacy as books and newspapers became readable by anyone in the evening, not just the wealthy. The infrastructure required was substantial: drilling operations, refineries, a global distribution network, standardized containers, and retail systems. Yet within a few decades, this entire industry arose and transformed daily life. Of course, electric lighting would later eclipse oil lamps, but for several generations, the simple kerosene lamp represented freedom from the tyranny of darkness, an extension of human capability into the night hours. Sitting with an oil lamp now, you're connected to that history, using a technology that bridged the ancient world and the modern one. The lamp, freshly filled, burns bright again. You return your attention to the window, where frost patterns have continued to elaborate themselves, growing more complex and beautiful as the night deepens and the glass gets colder. Ice crystals can form in different structures depending on temperature and humidity. The familiar six-sided snowflake structure is just one possibility, and window frost can create feather-like dendrites, hexagonal plates, needle-shaped columns, or even intricate fern-like patterns, all following the underlying geometry that water molecules prefer when they freeze. The same molecule, H2O, can create remarkably different visible patterns based on subtle variations in conditions. Very cold temperatures tend to produce simpler, more plate-like crystals. Temperatures just below freezing with high humidity encourage the elaborate branching dendrites that look like frozen ferns. The presence of impurities or imperfections on the glass surface creates preferred nucleation sites where crystals begin, and once started, they grow along paths of least resistance, creating those characteristic branching patterns. What's remarkable is that these patterns emerge purely from physical laws. No blueprint, no plan, just water molecules arranging themselves in the configuration that's most energetically favorable given the local conditions. It's spontaneous order arising from chaos, pattern emerging from randomness. Mathematicians and physicists study frost and snowflake formation because they exhibit characteristics of complex systems and fractal geometry, patterns that repeat at different scales, self-similarity, and extreme sensitivity to initial conditions. The same principles that govern frost on your window also appear in river networks, lightning bolts, and the branching of blood vessels in your body. Nature uses the same mathematical solutions over and over, at vastly different scales. You find yourself wondering about the animals outside, how they're managing this cold night, where they shelter, how they stay warm. The forest seems silent, but you know it's full of hidden life. Many small mammals survive winter by entering torpor, a state of decreased physiological activity where body temperature drops, heart rate slows dramatically, and metabolic rate can decrease to as little as 2 to 5% of normal, allowing the animal to conserve energy when food is scarce and temperatures are extreme. Torpor is different from hibernation. It's usually shorter term, sometimes just overnight or for a few days during particularly harsh weather. A mouse in torpor might drop its body temperature from 98 degrees to just barely above freezing, reducing its energy needs to almost nothing. Its breathing becomes slow and shallow, its heartbeat drops from hundreds of beats per minute to perhaps a few dozen. When conditions improve or when the animal needs to find food, it can arouse from torpor relatively quickly, though the warming process requires energy and leaves the animal vulnerable for a period. True hibernators like bears, ground squirrels, and woodchucks enter a deeper, longer state, sometimes sleeping for months with only occasional brief arousals. Their bodies prepare and fall by building up fat reserves that will fuel them through the winter. Bears, despite popular belief, don't hibernate as deeply as smaller mammals. They can wake relatively easily if disturbed, and pregnant females give birth during winter dormancy and nurse cubs while in a reduced metabolic state. The strategies animals use to survive winter cold are diverse and ingenious: torpor, hibernation, migration, food caching, growing thicker fur, huddling together for warmth, or simply staying active and eating constantly to fuel heat production. Each species has found its own solution to the challenge of surviving months when food is scarce and cold is life-threatening. A gust of wind hits the cabin, and you hear snow pelting against the north wall. The storm is picking up intensity. You're glad to be inside, glad for the thick log walls and the fire and the stores of food and fuel. Log construction, traditional in forested regions worldwide from Scandinavia to Russia to North America, provides excellent insulation because of wood's natural resistance to heat transfer and because well-fitted logs create a thick, solid wall with significant thermal mass that moderates temperature swings. A log wall 12 inches thick has an R value measurement of thermal resistance of around R12 to R15, but more importantly, the mass of the wood absorbs heat during the day or when the fire is burning strongly, then slowly releases that heat when the fire dies down or when outside temperatures drop. This thermal mass effect means log cabins heat up relatively slowly but also cool down slowly, maintaining a more stable interior temperature than thin-walled structures. The spaces between logs, traditionally chinked with moss, clay, or rope caulking, require maintenance to prevent air infiltration, but when properly maintained, log walls are remarkably weathertight. The wood itself also regulates humidity to some degree, absorbing moisture when humidity is high and releasing it when air is dry, creating a more comfortable interior environment. Culturally, log construction represents self-sufficiency. Logs could be cut, transported, and assembled using basic tools and knowledge, requiring minimal purchased materials. A family could build their own shelter from the forest around them. The skills were passed down through generations, with different regions developing distinctive styles and techniques: Scandinavian saddle notch corners, Russian dovetail joints, American square notch construction. Each method represents generations of accumulated knowledge about how to work with wood, how to create structures that will stand for decades or even centuries. You stir the broth and decide it's reached its perfect point. The vegetables are tender, the liquid is rich and deeply flavored, the aromatics have given their essence. You ladle a full bowl and carry it carefully back to your chair. The Japanese concept of ichigo ichi, roughly translating to one time, one meeting, suggests that each moment is unique and will never occur again in exactly the same way, and this awareness can transform ordinary experiences into something precious and worthy of full attention. This bowl of broth, this particular night, this exact configuration of wind and snow and firelight and thought, it exists only now, only once. Tomorrow's broth will be different, even if made with the same ingredients. Tomorrow's fire will burn differently. The snow will have changed the landscape in ways you can't yet see. This philosophy, drawn from Japanese tea ceremony tradition, encourages presence and appreciation, a recognition that impermanence is not something to mourn but something that makes each moment valuable precisely because it won't last. In winter, when days can seem to blend together in sameness, this awareness becomes especially important. Yes, there will be many winter nights, but this one, this specific evening with its particular quality of cold, its specific pattern of frost on the window, the exact state of your thoughts and feelings, exists only once. The broth tastes the way it does only in this moment. An hour from now, it will have changed subtly. You are not the same person who sat down an hour ago. Experience has continued to shape you, moment by moment. Recognizing this impermanence doesn't create sadness but rather a gentle attentiveness, a savoring of what is, exactly as it is, right now. You sip the broth slowly, noticing the layers of flavor, the richness of the bones, the sweetness of the roots, the herbal notes, the salt, the warmth spreading through your chest and belly. It's deeply satisfying in a way that goes beyond nutrition. The gut-brain connection, the complex bidirectional communication network between the gastrointestinal system and the central nervous system, means that what and how we eat directly affects mood, cognition, and even personality, and warm, nourishing foods like broth can trigger both physical satiety signals and emotional responses associated with comfort, safety, and care. Your gut contains hundreds of millions of neurons, sometimes called the second brain, and it produces many of the same neurotransmitters found in your brain, including serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. The gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria living in your intestines, also influences brain function through various pathways, including the vagus nerve and through the production of metabolites that affect brain chemistry. When you eat warm, easily digestible, nutrient-dense food like broth, you're supporting this system, providing amino acids that are building blocks for neurotransmitters, warmth that triggers relaxation responses, minerals that support nerve function, and easily absorb nutrients that don't stress the digestive system. There's also the psychological dimension. Warm soup is associated with being cared for, with maternal nurturing, with home and safety. These associations are learned but powerful, and they trigger genuine physiological responses, reduce stress hormones, increased feelings of well-being. Food is never just fuel, it's medicine, information, and emotional sustenance all at once. Outside, the wind continues its work, and somewhere in the distance, you hear a tree branch crack and fall, not uncommon in winter storms, when the weight of ice and snow tests every limb. Trees shed branches during winter storms through a process that's partly mechanical failure and partly adaptive strategy. Weak or dead branches break under snow load, but some species also employ cladoptosis, or self-pruning, where the tree essentially cuts off less productive branches, allowing resources to be directed to more vital parts of the tree. The mechanical failures happen when snow and ice accumulate beyond what the branch structure can support, especially on branches that are already weakened by disease, insect damage, or age. But trees also undergo what biologists call programmed branch shedding, where hormonal signals weaken the connection between a branch and the trunk at the branch collar, making the branch more likely to detach under stress. This isn't random. The tree is making strategic decisions about resource allocation. A shaded lower branch that no longer produces enough energy through photosynthesis to justify maintaining it becomes expendable. Winter storms simply provide the mechanical force to complete the separation the tree has already initiated. This is why you often see healthy trees with clean branch scars where limbs once grew. The tree has actively managed its architecture. Foresters call this natural pruning, and it's part of how trees in dense forests develop tall, straight trunks with branches only at the top where light is available. Walking through the woods after a winter storm, the fallen branches aren't just debris, they're evidence of the forest making choices, adapting, reshaping itself for survival and efficiency. You finish your bowl of broth and set it aside with a satisfied sigh. The warmth has spread through you completely now. You feel heavy in the best way, relaxed, fed, ready for sleep eventually, but content to sit a while longer in the lamplight. The evening has reached that point where time seems to suspend itself. You're not sleepy exactly, but deeply relaxed, existing in that peaceful space between waking alertness and drowsy contentment. The cabin feels like its own small world, complete and self-contained. The psychological concept of refugia, borrowed from ecology where it describes places where life persists during harsh conditions, applies to the human need for safe, bounded spaces where we can retreat from the demands and uncertainties of the larger world, and a winter cabin functions as exactly this kind of refuge, both physically and psychologically. In ecology, refugia are pockets where species survive during ice ages or droughts, places with microclimates or resources that allow life to persist when surrounding areas become inhospitable. For humans, refugia serve a similar function mentally and emotionally. They're places where we can let our guard down, where the complexity of the outside world is temporarily held at bay, where we can rest and restore ourselves. A cabin in winter, cut off by snow and cold from the larger world's chaos and demands, becomes a refuge in the truest sense. The bounded space, the controllable environment, the simplification of needs down to warmth, food, and shelter, all of this creates psychological safety that allows deeper relaxation than we often achieve in our normal lives. This isn't escapism but rather necessary restoration. Humans aren't designed for constant stimulation and stress. We need periods of withdrawal, simplicity, and safety to maintain mental health. Traditional cultures understood this, building rhythms of activity and rest into the year, with winter naturally becoming a time of reduced external engagement and increased internal focus. The refuge isn't about hiding from life but about creating conditions where you can process life, integrate experience, and emerge renewed. You stand and move to the small shelf where you keep dried herbs and tea. Your fingers brush past chamomile, mint, and settle on a small jar of dried rose hips, tart and fruity, rich in vitamin C, perfect for a winter evening. Rose hips, the fruit of the rose plant that remains after flowers fade, are extraordinarily high in vitamin C, containing 10 to 50 times more per ounce than oranges, and they were a crucial source of this essential nutrient during winter months in northern climates, where citrus doesn't grow and fresh produce is scarce. During World War II, when German U-boats disrupted citrus imports to Britain, the government organized massive volunteer efforts to harvest wild rose hips from hedgerows, and the resulting rose hip syrup was distributed to children to prevent scurvy and support immune function. Vitamin C is water-soluble and not stored in the body, so it must be consumed regularly, and before modern transportation made year-round produce available, winter was a time when vitamin C deficiency became a real concern. Traditional northern peoples knew which plants retain nutrients through winter: rose hips, pine needles, certain tree barks, and used them medicinally. The tart, slightly sweet flavor of rose hip tea is distinctive, and the process of drying the hips concentrates both their flavor and their nutrients. Modern analysis has revealed that rose hips also contain flavonoids, carotenoids, and other antioxidants with anti-inflammatory properties. But beyond the chemistry, there's something deeply satisfying about drinking a tea made from something you harvested yourself in autumn, carefully dried, and stored for winter use, a direct connection to the landscape and seasons, a form of self-sufficiency that nourishes more than just the body. You prepare the tea in a small pot, adding a few dried rose hips to hot water from the kettle that's been simmering on the stove. The water turns a beautiful amber-red color, and the scent that rises is both familiar and wild. The ritual of tea preparation and consumption has been recognized across cultures as a meditative practice. The Japanese tea ceremony, or Shinoyu, Chinese gongfu tea tradition, British afternoon tea, Russian Zavarka method, each represents not just beverage preparation but a deliberate slowing down, a focusing of attention, and a creation of beauty and meaning around a simple act. The Japanese tea ceremony, developed over centuries and influenced by Zen Buddhism, elevates tea preparation to an art form where every movement is intentional, every utensil carefully chosen, and the entire process becomes a meditation on presence, simplicity, and respect. But even without formal training, the act of making tea mindfully, heating water to the right temperature, selecting tea or herbs with care, steeping for the proper time, pouring slowly, holding the warm cup, noticing the aroma before tasting, can serve the same function of bringing attention into the present moment. The pause that tea creates in the day, the permission to sit and simply drink while doing nothing else, runs counter to modern culture's emphasis on multitasking and productivity. Traditional tea culture recognizes that this pause isn't wasted time but essential time, that the mind and body need these moments of ritual and rest. In winter, when darkness falls early and evenings are long, tea becomes even more important, a way to mark transitions, to create small ceremonies that give structure and meaning to the hours, to warm yourself from within while engaging in an act that connects you to centuries of human culture. The tea steeps, and you watch the color deepen. Outside, the wind has quieted somewhat. The storm may be passing, or perhaps just pausing before the next wave. Winter storms often move in waves or bands, with periods of intense snowfall alternating with calmer conditions, because the storm systems themselves have internal structure, spiral arms of precipitation rotating around a low-pressure center, similar to how hurricanes have distinct rain bands, though winter storms are much larger and less organized. A major winter storm system can be 1,000 miles across, and as it rotates counterclockwise, in the northern hemisphere, different parts of the system pass over any given location. You might experience heavy snow for several hours, then a lull when you're between bands, then another round of intense snowfall. The wind patterns also vary throughout a storm's passage, typically strengthening as the center approaches, then shifting direction as it passes, then gradually calming as the system moves away. Weather-wise people learn to read these patterns, to recognize when a lull is temporary and when it signals the storm's end. Before modern forecasting, survival often depended on this kind of observational skill, noticing the quality of clouds, the direction of wind, the behavior of animals, the feel of the air. Indigenous weather knowledge, developed over countless generations, could predict conditions days in advance based on subtle science. Today we have satellites and computer models, but there's still value in learning to read the sky, to notice the patterns, to develop an embodied sense of weather rather than just checking a forecast on a screen. You pour the tea, straining out the rose hips, and return to your chair with the steaming cup. The first sip is tart and warming, complex in flavor, vibrant despite being made from dried fruit harvested months ago. Tartness or sourness in food and drink comes from acidic compounds. In rose hips, primarily ascorbic acid, vitamin C, and various fruit acids, and this taste triggers specific receptors on the tongue that evolved to help humans identify both nutritious foods like vitamin C-rich fruits and potentially harmful foods like spoiled items with bacterial acids. The ability to taste sourness is one of the 5 basic tastes, and it serves important functions. Moderate sourness often indicates foods rich in vitamin C and other beneficial acids. Strong sourness can warn of fermentation or spoilage. Humans have learned to cultivate pleasant sourness through fermentation: yogurt, cheese, sauerkraut, sourdough bread, wine, vinegar, transforming simple ingredients into complex, flavorful, and often more digestible foods. The taste receptors for sourness respond to hydrogen ions, which all acids produce when dissolved in water. Interestingly, people's sensitivity to and enjoyment of sour flavors varies considerably. Some love intensely sour foods, while others find even mild tartness unpleasant. This variation may have evolutionary roots in different dietary patterns and different environments. In winter, sour flavors can be especially appealing because they provide contrast to the rich, fatty, often bland foods that dominate cold weather diets. A tart tea or a spoonful of fermented vegetables cuts through the heaviness, stimulates digestion, and provides sensory variety that prevents palate fatigue. The warmth of the tea spreads through you, different from the warmth of broth, lighter, more energizing somehow, despite the lateness of the hour. Rosehip tea has a gentle stimulating quality without the jittery edge of caffeinated drinks. Caffeine, found in tea, coffee, and chocolate, is actually a plant defense compound, an alkaloid that plants produce to deter insects and other herbivores. But humans have learned to enjoy and even crave its stimulating effects, and the history of caffeinated beverages is intertwined with cultural development, labor patterns, and even political revolutions. Coffee and tea both became enormously popular in Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries, and some historians argue that the shift from alcohol, which was safer to drink than water in many places, to coffee and tea as daily beverages contributed to the Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution by keeping workers and thinkers more alert and focused. Coffee houses became centers of intellectual exchange, political discussion, and business negotiation. The global trade in coffee and tea drove colonialism, slavery, and economic development across continents. Wars were fought over tea taxes. Entire economies were built on coffee production. But caffeine's effects, while useful for alertness and concentration, can also disrupt sleep and create dependency. Many traditional cultures restrict caffeine use to specific times of day or specific contexts: tea ceremonies in the afternoon, coffee with breakfast, but avoided in evening hours. The absence of caffeine in herbal teas like rosehip makes them suitable for any time, including evening, when you want warmth and flavor without stimulation that might interfere with sleep. Different tools for different purposes, each with its proper place and time. You notice that the fire has burned down to glowing coals. You set down your tea and add a few pieces of wood, arranging them to catch slowly, building the fire back up for the night ahead. The stages of a wood fire: ignition, flame combustion, coaling, and burnout, each serve different purposes and require different management, and understanding this progression allows you to control your fire for different needs, from quick heat to long-lasting warmth to cooking with specific temperature ranges. Fresh wood first must reach ignition temperature, around 500 to 600 degrees Fahrenheit for most woods, at which point volatile gases in the wood vaporize and combust, creating flames. This flame stage produces rapid heat and light but consumes wood quickly. As the volatile gases are exhausted, the fire transitions to coaling stage, where solid carbon in the wood burns more slowly, producing intense radiant heat but less flame. These glowing coals can remain hot for hours, providing steady warmth and ideal cooking conditions. Finally, the burnout stage occurs when fuel is depleted and the fire gradually cools. For overnight heating, you want to reach the coaling stage with large pieces of dense hardwood, then damp down the air supply to slow combustion, allowing the coals to smolder through the night. For cooking, different stages suit different foods. high flames for boiling, hot coals for roasting or baking, gentle coals for simmering. Traditional cooks manage fires with extraordinary precision, creating different heat zones within a single fireplace or stove, using the progression of the fire as a kind of timer. It's a skill that requires practice and attention, learning the specific burning characteristics of different woods and how they respond to airflow adjustments. The new wood begins to catch, flames curling up around the edges. You watch for a moment to ensure it's established, then close the stove door and adjust the damper to your preferred setting. Dampers and air vents on wood stoves control the amount of oxygen reaching the fire, which directly affects burn rate, heat output, and fuel efficiency. More air creates a hotter, faster burn that consumes wood quickly but provides intense heat, while restricted air creates a slower, smoldering burn that uses fuel more efficiently but produces less immediate heat. The art is in finding the balance appropriate for your needs. Wide open dampers are useful when starting a fire or when you need to heat a cold cabin quickly. Once the fire is established and the cabin is warm, closing the damper partially slows the burn, making your wood last longer while maintaining comfortable temperatures. Close it too much, however, and the fire smolders inefficiently, producing creosote, a tar-like substance that builds up in chimneys and can cause chimney fires, and wasting potential heat as unburned gases go up the chimney. Modern EPA-certified wood stoves are designed to burn efficiently even at low damper settings, using secondary air systems and catalytic converters to ensure complete combustion. But the basic principle remains: managing airflow is how you manage fire. This control gives you agency over your environment in a direct, tangible way that thermostat-controlled central heating doesn't provide. You must pay attention, make adjustments, develop a feel for how the system responds. It's more work than modern heating, but it also creates a relationship. You're not just consuming warmth but actively producing it, managing it, understanding it. You return to your chair and take up the tea again. It's cooled slightly, now the perfect drinking temperature. The tartness has mellowed, and subtle floral notes emerge that weren't apparent in the first hot sip. Temperature affects our perception of flavor dramatically. The same food or beverage can taste quite different when hot, warm, or cold because temperature affects both the volatility of aromatic compounds, which we perceive through smell, not taste, and the sensitivity of our taste receptors themselves. Hot liquids release more aromatic compounds into the air, which is why hot tea or coffee smells stronger than cold, and smell contributes enormously to what we perceive as flavor. Additionally, our taste receptors for sweetness become more sensitive at warmer temperatures, while bitter receptors are more sensitive to cold. This is why ice cream makers add more sugar than seems necessary when tasting the warm base. Once frozen, the reduced sweetness perception means the frozen product tastes balanced. With tea, the evolution of flavor as it cools can reveal complexity that's hidden at high temperatures. Some teas are intentionally served at different temperatures to highlight different characteristics. The Japanese practice of drinking sencha at various temperatures shows how the same tea can present entirely different flavor profiles depending on heat. This temperature-flavor relationship is why wine service involves such specific temperature guidelines, why beer styles have recommended serving temperatures, why coffee professionals talk about optimal brewing and drinking temperatures. Temperature isn't just about comfort or safety, it's an integral part of the flavor experience, another variable to be understood and managed for maximum enjoyment. The lamp flickers again, not from low oil this time, but perhaps from a draft. You look around and notice the frost on the windows has thickened, creating an almost opaque barrier between inside and outside. The cabin feels even more enclosed, more separate from the cold world beyond. You set down your empty teacup and consider the evening. There's a fullness to it, a sense of completion, yet no urgency to move toward sleep. Time in the cabin operates by different rules than time in the outside world. It stretches and compresses according to attention rather than clocks. The perception of time is highly subjective and influenced by factors including novelty, attention, emotional state, and routine, which is why childhood summers seem to last forever while adult years fly by, and why the same hour can feel like minutes when you're engaged or like an eternity when you're bored. Psychologists have found that novel experiences create more detailed memories, which makes the time period seem longer in retrospect. Routine, by contrast, creates fewer distinct memories, so days and weeks blur together and seem to have passed quickly. Attention also affects time perception. When you're fully absorbed in an activity, what psychologists Mihai Csikszentmihalyi called flow, you lose track of time passing, but the experience feels rich and full. Conversely, when you're watching the clock and waiting, every minute drags. Emotional intensity stretches time. Moments of fear or joy seem to last longer than neutral moments. In a winter cabin, with fewer external markers of time's passage, with days organized around natural light and basic needs rather than schedules and appointments, time can feel both slower and fuller. The hours are long, but they're filled with small rituals and observations that create distinct memories. You're not waiting for time to pass but inhabiting it, living inside the present rather than constantly anticipating the future or reviewing the past. It's a different relationship with time entirely, one that's increasingly rare in modern life but deeply satisfying when you can access it. You rise and walk to the door, opening it just a crack to feel the night air. The cold rushes in, sharp and clean, and you can hear that the wind has died down almost completely. The snow is still falling, but gently now, vertical rather than slanted. Snow can fall in different patterns depending on wind conditions, atmospheric stability, and the size and shape of the flakes. Gentle, vertical snowfall with large flakes indicates stable air and light winds, while horizontal or upward moving snow suggests strong winds and turbulent conditions, and understanding these patterns helps predict how snow will accumulate and whether conditions are improving or deteriorating. When snow falls straight down in those iconic, lazy spirals, it means the atmosphere is relatively calm. The flakes have time to develop their full, complex structures, and they fall at their natural terminal velocity without being pushed around by wind. This kind of snowfall often produces the deepest, fluffiest accumulations, perfect powder. When wind picks up, snow starts falling at an angle, and in strong winds, it can move horizontally or even upward in the gusts. This wind-driven snow, sometimes called blowing snow, doesn't necessarily mean snow is falling from clouds. It can be snow that fell earlier being picked up and redistributed by wind. Blizzard conditions occur when falling or blowing snow reduces visibility to a quarter mile or less, combined with sustained winds of 35 miles per hour or more. The worst blizzards can create complete whiteouts where you can't see your hand in front of your face, and the wind-driven snow infiltrates every crack and gap, creating drifts many feet deep in some areas while leaving others nearly bare. Experienced winter travelers learn to read snow conditions, the way it's falling, the way it's being deposited, the patterns of drifting, as critical safety information. You close the door and shake off the cold, but it's invigorated you, sharpened your awareness. The contrast between inside and outside makes the cabin's warmth feel even more precious. Controlled exposure to cold, practiced in traditions from Scandinavian ice swimming to Japanese misogi to modern cold water therapy, can have significant physiological and psychological benefits, including improved circulation, enhanced immune response, increased metabolic rate, and strengthened mental resilience. When you expose yourself to cold water or air, your body responds with vasoconstriction to preserve core temperature, followed by shivering to generate heat through muscle activity. With regular practice, your body becomes more efficient at these responses. Circulation improves, brown fat, a type of fat tissue that generates heat, becomes more active, and you develop a greater capacity to maintain core temperature in cold conditions. There's also a significant mental component. Choosing to experience discomfort, to override your body's initial panic response to cold, builds a kind of psychological resilience that transfers to other challenging situations. Many traditional cultures incorporated regular cold exposure into daily life. Morning washes with cold water, sauna followed by snow rolling or ice plunges, winter swimming in frozen lakes, recognizing that this practice strengthened both body and character. Modern research has confirmed many of the claimed benefits. though it's important to practice cold exposure safely and gradually. The brief blast of cold air when you open the cabin door on a winter night is a mild version of this practice, a reminder that you can handle discomfort, that your body is capable and resilient, that the cold is not your enemy but simply a different state of being. You return to the stove and open the door to check the fire. The wood has caught well, burning steadily now, and the cabin is thoroughly warm. You won't need to add more wood for several hours. The specific heat capacity of different materials, the amount of energy required to raise their temperature, varies greatly, and understanding this helps explain why some materials feel warm to the touch while others feel cold, even when they're the same temperature, and why certain materials are better for storing or releasing heat. Metal has high thermal conductivity but relatively low specific heat capacity, which means it transfers heat quickly but doesn't store much heat. This is why a metal door handle feels cold to the touch even in a warm room. It's quickly conducting heat away from your hand. Wood has low thermal conductivity and moderate specific heat capacity, which is why it feels warm to the touch and why wooden floors are more comfortable than tile or stone floors at the same temperature. Water has exceptionally high specific heat capacity. It takes a lot of energy to heat water, but once heated, it releases that energy slowly. This is why large bodies of water moderate climate, why hot water bottles stay warm for hours, and why the human body, being mostly water, maintains stable temperature despite external fluctuations. Masonry materials like stone and brick also have high heat capacity, which is why they're used in traditional heating systems. A masonry stove or stone fireplace absorbs heat during burning and releases it gradually over many hours. Understanding these properties lets you design living spaces and heating systems that work with materials' natural characteristics rather than fighting against them. You settle back into your chair and notice your handwork basket in the corner, a sock that needs darning, some mending you've been putting off. Your hands want something to do, some simple, repetitive task that occupies them while leaving your mind free to wander. Handwork, knitting, sewing, carving, basketry, and other manual crafts, provides what psychologists call productive meditation, where the hands are busy with a learned, repetitive task while the mind is free to process thoughts, solve problems, or simply rest in a state of relaxed awareness. Brain imaging studies show that skilled handwork activates motor regions and spatial processing areas while often quieting the default mode network's anxious rumination, creating a state similar to meditation but more accessible for many people than sitting meditation. The rhythmic, repetitive motions can be genuinely calming, lowering heart rate and reducing stress hormones. Additionally, handwork produces tangible results. A repaired sock, a carved spoon, a knitted scarf, which provides a sense of accomplishment and self-efficacy that's psychologically valuable, especially in winter when other productive activities may be limited. Traditional cultures understood this intuitively. Long winter evenings were times for handwork, often done communally with storytelling, singing, or conversation. The work kept hands busy, produced useful items, and created social cohesion. Modern life, with its emphasis on efficiency and consumption, often dismisses handwork as quaint or inefficient, but we're rediscovering its value, the satisfaction of making, the meditative quality of the work, the connection to materials and skills passed down through generations. In a cabin, with long, quiet hours and limited entertainment options, handwork becomes not just productive but deeply satisfying. You retrieve the sock and a darning egg, threading a needle with wool yarn that matches closely enough. The hole isn't large, just some worn spots at the heel that need reinforcing before they become actual holes. Darning, the practice of reweaving worn areas in fabric to repair them, was once an essential household skill, and the phrase, darning socks, evokes a whole era of domestic economy where items were maintained and repaired until they were truly unwearable, then often repurposed into quilts, rugs, or cleaning cloths before finally being discarded. Before the Industrial Revolution made clothing cheap and abundant, fabric was valuable. A garment might be handed down through multiple family members, repaired repeatedly, altered and restyled, and finally cut up for other uses. The ability to repair clothing skillfully extended its life and represented real economic value. Darning specifically involves weaving new thread through and around damaged areas, essentially recreating the original fabric structure. A well-executed darn is nearly invisible and can be as strong as the original material. Different darning techniques suit different fabrics and damage types. Pattern darning for decorative repair, Swiss darning for knitwear, net darning for large holes. The tools are simple: needles, thread, and often a darning mushroom or egg to hold the fabric taut and provide a smooth surface to work against. The practice has largely disappeared in wealthy countries where buying new is cheaper than repairing old, but it's seeing a revival among people interested in sustainability, self-sufficiency, and the satisfaction of maintaining their possessions. There's something meditative about darning, about the careful attention to detail, the rhythmic in and out of the needle, the gradual transformation of damaged into whole. Your hands work slowly, methodically, weaving the yarn back and forth across the worn area. The work is soothing, requiring just enough attention to keep you focused but not so much that you can't let your mind wander. The concept of flow, or optimal experience, described by psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, occurs when skill level and task difficulty are well matched, creating a state of absorbed focus where self-consciousness disappears and time seems to distort, and this state is associated with deep satisfaction and enhanced well-being. Flow requires several conditions: clear goals, even simple ones like repair this sock. Immediate feedback, you can see your progress, and a balance between challenge and skill, difficult enough to be engaging but not so hard it's frustrating. During flow, the prefrontal cortex, the brain region associated with self-monitoring and time awareness, shows reduced activity, which is why people in flow often lose track of time and feel less self-conscious. Activities from sports to music to crafts to writing can induce flow states when conditions are right. Interestingly, flow is more easily achieved in structured, goal-directed activities than in passive entertainment. You're more likely to experience flow while darning a sock or playing an instrument than while watching television. This may partly explain why handwork is so satisfying despite being inefficient. It regularly produces flow states that contribute to happiness and life satisfaction in ways that efficient, passive consumption doesn't. In winter evenings, with few distractions and ample time, activities that might feel like chores in summer can become opportunities for flow, for that deeply satisfying state of absorbed engagement. You finish the darning and hold up the sock to examine your work. It's not invisible, but it's neat and will hold. You feel a small flush of satisfaction. Something that was damaged is now repaired, returned to usefulness by your own hands. The satisfaction derived from making and repairing things, what some researchers call homo faber, or man the maker, fulfillment, appears to be a deep human need, and societies that move toward total consumption and away from production may inadvertently undermine psychological well-being by depriving people of this source of meaning and competence. Throughout most of human history, people made or acquired through direct trade most of what they used. Even specialists like blacksmiths or weavers made complete items from raw materials, seeing the entire process from beginning to end. The Industrial Revolution and subsequent consumer economy increasingly separated people from production, so that most people now consume goods with little understanding of how they're made or how to repair them. While this brings convenience and abundance, it may also create a psychological void, a sense of helplessness, of being dependent on systems beyond our control, of lacking practical competence. Studies of craftspeople, gardeners, and others who make things consistently show high levels of life satisfaction, sense of purpose, and feelings of competence. The maker movement, and renewed interest in homesteading, crafts, and repair skills may represent people trying to reclaim some of this maker satisfaction. In a cabin, where you must maintain your systems, make or repair many items, and understand how things work in order to survive comfortably, you engage this fundamental human capacity for competence and self-sufficiency. It's empowering in a way that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. You set aside the mending and stretch your fingers. They're a bit stiff from the close work, but pleasantly so, the stiffness of use rather than cold. The cabin is deeply warm now, perhaps even too warm. You adjust the damper on the stove a bit more. Thermal comfort is highly individual and affected by factors including age, body composition, activity level, acclimatization, and even cultural background. What feels comfortably warm to one person may feel too hot or too cold to another, and people can adapt to significantly different temperature ranges given time and regular exposure. Older adults often prefer warmer temperatures than younger people, possibly due to changes in metabolism and circulation. People with more body fat tend to tolerate cold better than lean individuals. Active people generate more metabolic heat and often prefer cooler ambient temperatures than sedentary people. Cultural background matters too. People from tropical climates often feel cold at temperatures that people from northern climates find comfortable, and vice versa. Acclimatization is real. People who regularly expose themselves to cold conditions develop physiological adaptations that make cold more tolerable, while those who always stay in climate-controlled environments become less able to handle temperature variation. There's also considerable individual variation that isn't explained by any of these factors, simple preference, perhaps rooted in genetics or early experience. Understanding that thermal comfort is subjective helps explain why thermostats are such a common source of household conflict, and why no single temperature setting satisfies everyone. In a cabin where you control your own heat, you can adjust to your personal preference without needing to compromise, which is its own small luxury. You stand and walk to the window one more time, wiping a clear spot in the condensation to look out. The snow has created a transformed landscape, every surface softened and rounded, every harsh angle buried under curves of white. It's beautiful in its simplicity. You stand at the window, watching the snow continue its quiet work. The world outside has become abstract, just shapes and shadows, the familiar landmarks of the forest reduced to gentle suggestions beneath the white blanket. Snow cover fundamentally alters the acoustic properties of a landscape, absorbing sound waves rather than reflecting them, which is why snowy environments feel so quiet. The porous structure of snow, with all its trapped air pockets, acts as a natural sound insulator, dampening everything from footsteps to voices to the ambient noise of wind through trees. Fresh, fluffy snow is particularly effective at sound absorption because the irregular surfaces of the snowflakes and the air spaces between them trap and dissipate sound energy. Studies have measured snow's sound absorption coefficient at various frequencies, finding it can absorb 60 to 90% of sound energy, especially at higher frequencies. This is why your voice sounds different in a snow-covered landscape, less resonance, more immediate, as if sound dies just beyond your lips rather than carrying and echoing. Hard surfaces like pavement, buildings, and bare ground reflect sound, creating the ambient noise we're accustomed to, but snow swallows these reflections. The effect is most pronounced with fresh snow. As snow ages, compacts, and develops a crust, it becomes more reflective and the landscape grows noisier again. But on a night like this, with fresh snow falling and accumulating, the silence is profound, not the absence of sound exactly, but the absorption of it, a quietness that feels almost tangible, that you can sense pressing against your ears. You turn from the window and notice the small collection of stones on the windowsill, smooth river rocks you collected during warmer months, each one a different color and pattern. Your fingers trace over them, enjoying the cool, solid feel. Stones and rocks, formed over millions or billions of years through geological processes, contain compressed time in their structure. Sedimentary rocks preserve ancient layers of deposited material, igneous rocks capture moments of volcanic activity, and metamorphic rocks record the intense heat and pressure of tectonic events. When you hold a river rock, worn smooth by centuries or millennia of water flow, you're holding something that connects to deep time in a way that living things, even ancient trees, cannot match. The granite that forms many river rocks might be hundreds of millions of years old, formed when molten magma cooled slowly deep in the Earth's crust. The quartz crystals within might have formed under conditions of immense pressure that no longer exist in that location. Some rocks contain fossils, actual remnants of creatures that lived hundreds of millions of years ago, now preserved in stone. The Japanese aesthetic practice of suiseki, appreciating the natural beauty of stones, recognizes this quality, that stones are windows into vast spans of time, into processes operating on scales that dwarf human existence. Keeping stones, arranging them, handling them becomes a way of connecting to this deeper temporal dimension, a reminder that your life and concerns are brief moments in an incomprehensibly long story. In winter, when biological life slows or sleeps, stones become especially significant. They represent continuity, permanence, the underlying bedrock that persists through all seasons. You return to your chair and pick up a piece of wood from the kindling box, a nicely shaped bit of birch, too good for burning. You retrieve your pocket knife and begin to whittle, letting your hands work without any particular goal in mind. Whittling and wood carving have been practiced for tens of thousands of years, making them among humanity's oldest crafts, and the practice engages both hands and mind in ways that modern neuroscience shows can reduce stress, improve fine motor control, enhance spatial reasoning, and promote the kind of relaxed focus that facilitates creative thinking. The act of removing material to reveal form, whether you're carving a specific object or simply shaping wood for the pleasure of it, requires sustained attention and develops a keen understanding of how materials behave. Different woods have different characteristics. Basswood is soft and easy to carve but lacks distinctive grain. Oak is hard and durable but can be difficult to work. Birch offers moderate hardness with beautiful grain patterns. Walnut is prized for its rich color and workability. You learn to read the grain, to understand where wood will split easily and where it will resist, to feel when your blade is sharp and when it needs honing. The repetitive motion of the knife, the gradual accumulation of shavings, the slow emergence of form from formlessness, all of this creates a meditative state. Historically, whittling was a common pastime during winter evenings when outdoor work was impossible. Men would whittle utensils, toys, tools, decorative items, or simply whittle to pass time and keep hands busy. The practice didn't require expensive tools or materials, just a knife and a piece of wood, making it accessible to everyone. What emerged was both useful items and the intangible benefits of the practice itself: patience, focus, craftsmanship, satisfaction. The knife moves through the soft birch easily, curls of pale wood falling into your lap. You're not making anything in particular, just removing wood, following the grain, seeing what wants to emerge. The concept of subtractive creation, where form is revealed by removing material rather than adding it, appears in sculpting, carving, editing, and even in life philosophy, suggesting that sometimes the path to essence involves taking away rather than accumulating. Michelangelo famously said he saw the angel in the marble and carved until he set it free. The idea that the form already exists within the material and the artist's job is to remove what obscures it. This applies to wood carving, stone sculpting, and also to writing, where editing removes unnecessary words to reveal clearer meaning, to design, where refinement often means simplification, and to life itself, where contentment sometimes comes from removing commitments, possessions, or habits rather than adding more. The minimalist movement, the KonMari organizing method, the practice of digital detox, all reflect this principle that less can be more, that removing what's unnecessary reveals what's essential. In winter, this philosophy finds natural expression. The landscape itself becomes minimalist, color reduced to whites and grays, forms simplified under snow, life pared down to essentials. Living in a cabin reinforces this. You have what you need and little more, and the absence of excess creates clarity and peace rather than deprivation. The knife removing wood, revealing form through subtraction, becomes a meditation on this principle. A larger curl of wood falls away, and you pause to examine what you've created so far. It's beginning to look like a simple spoon, though you hadn't consciously decided to make one. Sometimes the wood tells you what it wants to become. The properties of different woods make them suitable for different purposes. Hardwoods like maple and cherry are ideal for cutting boards and utensils because they're dense and resist knife marks, while softwoods like pine are better for construction because they're easy to work with and lightweight. And understanding these properties allows you to select the right wood for each application. Hardwoods come from deciduous trees, those that lose their leaves, and have denser cellular structure with smaller pores. They're generally harder, more durable, and more expensive, but they resist denting and wear better. Maple is particularly prized for cutting boards because its tight grain doesn't harbor bacteria as readily as more porous woods. Cherry darkens beautifully with age. Walnut is strong and shock-resistant. Oak is extremely hard but has large open pores that can trap debris. Softwoods come from conifers, evergreens, and have larger, more open cellular structure. They're lighter, easier to cut and shape, and generally less expensive. Pine is versatile and widely available. Cedar is naturally rot-resistant, making it ideal for outdoor use. Spruce has excellent strength-to-weight ratio. The terms hardwood and softwood don't always correlate perfectly with actual hardness. Balsa is technically a hardwood but is extremely soft, while yew is a softwood but quite hard. Beyond hardness, woods differ in workability, stability, tendency to warp, decay resistance, appearance, and even smell. Traditional craftspeople develop deep knowledge of local woods, understanding which trees produce the best wood for specific purposes, when to harvest them, and how to season and work them. This knowledge, accumulated over generations, allowed them to create objects that were not just functional but optimal for their purpose. You continue carving, hollowing out the bowl of the spoon gradually, testing the depth with your thumb. The work requires attention but not intense concentration. Your hands know what to do, guided by the feel of the wood and the resistance of the blade. Haptic feedback, the sense of touch and the physical feedback we receive when manipulating objects, is crucial for learning manual skills and appears to engage different neural pathways than visual learning alone, which is why hands-on practice is often more effective than observation for developing craftsmanship. When you carve, your hands are constantly receiving information. The resistance of the wood tells you about grain direction and density. The feel of the surface tells you about smoothness and any hidden flaws. The weight and balance tell you about the emerging form. This tactile information integrates with visual input to create a complete understanding that's richer than either sense alone could provide. Studies of skill acquisition show that motor learning, the kind that happens in your muscles and nervous system, not just your conscious mind, requires physical practice. You can watch videos of carving techniques endlessly, but your hands won't truly know how to carve until they've held the knife and felt the wood. This is why traditional apprenticeship involves so much hands-on work under supervision. The master could demonstrate and explain, but the apprentice had to develop their own haptic understanding through practice. Modern education, with its emphasis on screen-based learning, sometimes undervalues this kind of embodied knowledge, but it remains crucial for developing practical skills. In winter, with time for slow practice and no pressure to produce quickly, you can develop this kind of deep, felt understanding of materials and tools. The spoon is taking shape now, still rough, still needing refinement, but recognizably a spoon. You pause to brush away the accumulated shavings, gathering them into your hand and tossing them into the stove where they flare briefly and are consumed. Wood shavings and sawdust have numerous practical uses beyond simple disposal. They make excellent fire starters because their high surface area to volume ratio allows them to ignite quickly. They can be used as animal bedding, mulch for gardens, packing material, or even as a base for composting systems. The thin curls produced by planing or whittling are particularly good for starting fires because they catch flame almost instantly and burn hot enough to ignite larger kindling. Historically, nothing was wasted. Even the smallest scraps of wood had value. Sawdust was collected and used in icehouses as insulation, spread on floors in butcher shops and taverns to absorb liquids, mixed with glue to create wood filler, or compressed into fire logs. In some regions, sawdust was a significant commodity, sold to ice companies, stables, and other businesses. Today, wood waste products are used to make particle board, paper, and wood pellets for heating. The circular economy that traditional societies practiced, where every byproduct was someone's raw material, is something modern sustainability efforts are trying to recreate. In a cabin setting, this mindset comes naturally. Your whittling shavings start tomorrow's fire, your wood ash fertilizes the garden, your food scraps feed the compost. Nothing is truly waste. Everything cycles through different uses, each extracting whatever value remains before finally returning to the earth. You set the partially formed spoon aside for now and clean the knife blade, folding it closed and returning it to your pocket. The pile of shavings in the stove has burned down to nothing, just a brief flare of light and heat, now gone. Fire transforms matter from one state to another through combustion, a chemical reaction that breaks molecular bonds in fuel and creates new compounds, primarily carbon dioxide and water vapor, while releasing the energy that was stored in those bonds as heat and light. When wood burns, the cellulose and lignin that make up its structure are broken down. First, heat drives off moisture. Then, as temperature increases, the wood undergoes pyrolysis, thermal decomposition that releases volatile gases. These gases, when they reach ignition temperature in the presence of oxygen, combust. The visible flames are actually burning gas, not solid wood. What remains after the gases are driven off is charcoal, nearly pure carbon, which continues to burn in the coaling stage, oxidizing into carbon dioxide. The ash left after complete combustion consists of minerals that were in the wood but don't burn, primarily calcium, potassium, and magnesium compounds. Fire is transformation, a chemical process that releases energy stored by the tree through photosynthesis. When you burn wood, you're releasing solar energy that the tree captured months or years or decades ago, now converted to heat that warms your cabin. It's an ancient technology, perhaps the most fundamental human technology, and yet it still feels almost magical, striking a match and releasing this controlled transformation, this tamed chemical reaction that provides warmth and light. You lean back and close your eyes for a moment, simply resting. The evening has been full in its quietness, rich in its simplicity. You feel satisfied, content, present. Contentment, distinct from happiness, which is often tied to specific positive events, is a more subtle, stable state characterized by satisfaction with present circumstances, acceptance of what is, and absence of craving for different conditions. Psychologists who study well-being distinguish between hedonic happiness, pleasure and positive emotion, and eudaimonic well-being, meaning, purpose, and flourishing. Contentment falls somewhere between. It's the feeling that you have what you need, that life is fundamentally okay, that this moment is sufficient. It doesn't require perfect conditions or the absence of problems, just a sense of acceptance and peace with what is. Many spiritual traditions identify contentment as a key virtue. Buddhism teaches freedom from craving, Stoicism teaches accepting what's beyond your control, Christian monasticism values simplicity and gratitude. Modern consumer culture, by contrast, constantly encourages discontent. You're shown what you lack, what could be better, what you should want. The winter cabin, removed from these messages, creates conditions where contentment can emerge naturally. You have warmth, food, shelter, simple tasks, quiet hours. There's no advertising urging you toward the next purchase, no social media showing others' curated highlights, no constant comparison and aspiration. Just the reality of this evening, this fire, this moment, and the quiet recognition that it's enough. You open your eyes and look around the cabin with fresh appreciation. The lamp burning steadily. The fire glowing behind the stove glass. The wooden walls that hold the warmth. The simple furnishings. Everything exactly as it should be. The evening has reached that gentle slope toward night's deepest hours. You're not tired exactly, but you can feel sleep beginning to gather at the edges of your awareness, a soft invitation rather than a demand. The human sleep-wake cycle, governed by circadian rhythms and influenced by light exposure, functions most naturally when aligned with day-night patterns. Blue light from screens disrupts melatonin production, while the warm, dim light of fire and oil lamps allows the body to prepare naturally for sleep, which is why people living without electricity often report deeper, more restorative sleep. Your body's internal clock, located in the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the brain, responds primarily to light cues. Bright blue spectrum light signals daytime and suppresses melatonin, the hormone that promotes sleep. Warm, dim light, the kind produced by flames, doesn't suppress melatonin, allowing it to rise naturally as evening progresses. Before electric lighting, humans generally slept in two distinct periods, first sleep and second sleep, with a period of quiet wakefulness in between during which people might pray, contemplate, visit neighbors, or engage in intimate conversation. The Industrial Revolution and electric lights compressed sleep into a single consolidated period and allowed work and activity to extend far into the night. Some sleep researchers believe this represents a fundamental disruption of natural sleep patterns and may contribute to the epidemic of sleep disorders in modern societies. In a cabin lit only by fire and lamp, your body receives clear signals about the time of day, and sleep comes more naturally, more deeply, aligned with ancient rhythms that electric lights obscure. You bank the fire for the night, adjusting the damper to its lowest setting so the coals will burn slowly through the dark hours, leaving enough heat to keep the cabin comfortable until morning when you'll rebuild it. The practice of banking a fire, arranging coals and adding larger pieces of wood, then restricting airflow so combustion slows dramatically, is an essential skill for maintaining warmth through the night without constantly tending the fire, and it reflects a deep understanding of how combustion, heat retention, and airflow interact. When you bank a fire properly, you create a situation where the wood smolders rather than flames, releasing heat slowly and steadily. The key is having a good bed of hot coals. These provide sustained heat without flames. You place large pieces of dense hardwood on the coals, then close the damper most of the way, restricting oxygen flow. The wood continues to combust, but slowly, releasing heat throughout the night. By morning, you'll have either glowing coals or at least enough warmth in the ash bed to restart the fire easily with kindling. The technique requires judgment. Close the damper too much and the fire goes out completely. Leave it too open and the wood burns too fast. Different stoves have different characteristics, and learning your particular stove's behavior is part of developing competence with wood heat. Traditional knowledge included understanding which woods banked best, dense hardwoods like oak and hickory, optimal damper settings for different temperatures, and how to read the fire in the morning to know if it can be revived or must be restarted from scratch. It's practical knowledge, earned through experience, and it connects you to generations of people who managed fire as a survival necessity. You turn down the lamp wick slightly, reducing the flame to conserve oil and create softer lighting, just enough to move around by, not bright enough to keep you alert. Light intensity and color temperature directly affect alertness and physiological arousal. Bright, blue-toned light promotes wakefulness while dim, warm light encourages relaxation and sleep. And this relationship has been exploited in everything from casino design, bright lights to keep people gambling, to theater lighting, dim, warm tones to create intimacy. The color temperature of light is measured in Kelvin. Daylight is around 5,500 to 6,500 K and appears bluish-white, while candlelight is around 1,800 K and appears warm orange-amber. Our eyes and brains have evolved to associate these colors with times of day. Bright blue light means midday, warm orange means sunset or firelight. Modern, smart lighting tries to mimic natural patterns by shifting from cooler tones during the day to warmer ones in evening, but nothing replicates natural light or fire quite perfectly. The flicker of flames also has an effect. The random, organic variation in intensity and color appears to induce relaxation in ways that steady electric light doesn't. Studies using EEG to measure brain activity show that watching fire produces patterns associated with calm, meditative states. By dimming your lamp and reducing light levels as night deepens, you're working with your body's natural responses rather than fighting them, allowing the transition towards sleep to happen organically. The soft, warm glow of the low lamp creates an environment that feels safe and intimate while signaling that the day is ending. You prepare your sleeping space, unfolding the heavy quilts and arranging them just so. The bed will be cold when you first slip in, but you know it will warm quickly with your body heat, the quilts trapping warmth against you. Quilts and heavy blankets work through a combination of insulation and weight. The layers trap air which your body heat warms, creating a microclimate around you, while the weight provides deep pressure stimulation, which activates the parasympathetic nervous system and promotes feelings of calm and security. The insulating property comes from those trapped air layers we discussed earlier, but the weight itself has therapeutic effects independent of warmth. Deep pressure, like a firm hug or a weighted blanket, stimulates touch receptors that send signals through the vagus nerve, triggering a relaxation response. Heart rate and blood pressure decrease, cortisol, stress hormone, levels drop, and serotonin and dopamine, feel-good neurotransmitters, increase. This is why swaddling calms babies, why Temple Grandin's Hug Machine helps people with autism, and why weighted blankets have become popular for anxiety and sleep disorders. Traditional heavy quilts provide this same benefit, though it wasn't understood scientifically until recently. The weight is comforting in a primal way, creating a sense of being held and protected. Combined with the warmth and the softness of worn fabric, heavy quilts create ideal conditions for deep, restorative sleep. In a cold cabin, that weight becomes essential not just for warmth but for the feeling of safety and comfort it provides against the vast cold darkness outside. You perform your final evening tasks, checking that the door is latched, ensuring the fire screen is in place, setting a cup of water within reach for the night. Small rituals that mark the transition from waking to sleeping. Bedtime rituals and routines serve important psychological functions. They signal to your brain and body that sleep is approaching, create a sense of control and predictability, and can reduce anxiety by providing structure during the vulnerable transition between wakefulness and sleep. The specific actions matter less than their consistency and the mental associations they build. For some, it's brushing teeth and washing face. For others, it's reading or prayer or checking locks. What's important is the reliability. Doing the same things in the same order each night trains your body to recognize the pattern and begin preparing for sleep. This is particularly valuable for people with anxiety or sleep difficulties. The ritual provides something concrete to focus on rather than worries or racing thoughts. In traditional societies, evening rituals often had spiritual dimensions, prayers, blessings, expressions of gratitude, that served to mentally process the day and release concerns before sleep. Modern sleep hygiene advice emphasizes similar principles: consistent routines, winding down activities, avoiding stimulation. In a cabin, where evening naturally progresses from activity to quiet to sleep without the disruption of screens or schedules, these rituals emerge organically. You tend the fire, prepare your bed, dim the lights, each action a step in a familiar sequence that your body recognizes and responds to with increasing drowsiness. You blow out the lamp, and the cabin plunges into darkness, not complete, because the fire's glow seeps through the stove's glass door, casting faint, wavering light that barely reaches the walls. Your eyes begin to adjust. Human eyes can adapt to remarkably low light levels through a process called dark adaptation, where the pupils dilate and light-sensitive chemicals in the rod cells of the retina regenerate, eventually allowing vision in conditions millions of times dimmer than bright daylight. But this process takes 20 to 30 minutes and is instantly reversed by exposure to bright light. In darkness, your cone cells, which detect color and detail in bright light, become less active, while rod cells, which detect light and movement but not color, become dominant. This is why nighttime vision is mostly black, white, and shades of gray. Your rods are working while your cones are essentially offline. The rods are incredibly sensitive. Fully dark adapted eyes can detect a single photon of light under ideal conditions. But this adaptation is fragile. A single glance at a bright light destroys it, and you must wait another half hour for full adaptation to return. This is why traditional peoples were careful about nighttime light, using minimal light, shielding eyes from direct flames, preserving their night vision for navigation and safety. In the cabin, with only the faint glow of the banked fire, your eyes adapt partially, allowing you to see the basic shapes of furniture, the rectangle of the window with its frost patterns faintly visible against the lesser darkness outside. It's not frightening but peaceful, a darkness that feels protective rather than threatening, held at bay by the walls and the fire's small light. You slip into bed, and the cold sheets make you gasp softly, but you curl into yourself, generating warmth, and within moments the cold begins to retreat as your body heat accumulates under the quilts. Body heat generation, called thermogenesis, increases when you're cold through several mechanisms including shivering, rapid muscle contractions that generate heat, non-shivering thermogenesis, brown fat metabolism that produces heat without muscle movement, and increased metabolic rate. Your body burns more calories simply staying warm in cold conditions than in neutral temperatures. When you first enter a cold bed, you shiver slightly as your muscles generate heat through rapid contractions. Simultaneously, If you have active brown adipose tissue, brown fat, which adults retain primarily around the neck, shoulders, and spine, it begins burning energy to produce heat without shivering. Your metabolic rate increases overall. Your body burns fuel faster to maintain core temperature. This is why people living in cold climates often need more calories. Staying warm requires energy. The quilts don't generate heat themselves but trap the heat your body produces, preventing it from radiating away into the cold air. As the air layer between your skin and the quilts warms, you stop shivering and begin to feel comfortable. The transition from cold to warm is actually pleasant in its own way. There's satisfaction in feeling your own body's competence at creating warmth, at transforming cold bedding into a cozy nest through nothing but your own metabolism. It's a reminder that you are, among other things, a heat-generating organism, a warm-blooded creature adapted to maintain stable temperature even in challenging conditions. You settle deeper into the bedding, feeling your muscles relax as warmth spreads. Outside, the wind has picked up again slightly. You can hear it in the trees, a distant rushing sound that only emphasizes the stillness inside. The sound of wind, rain, or other white noise can actually improve sleep quality for many people by masking irregular sounds that might otherwise cause arousal and by providing a consistent acoustic background that the brain can tune out, allowing deeper sleep. White noise, sound containing all frequencies at equal intensity, and similar sounds like wind, rainfall, ocean waves, or even mechanical fans create a steady acoustic blanket that covers up sudden noises like creaking floors, distant traffic, or a partner's movements. The brain habituates to constant sounds, essentially filtering them out as non-threatening and irrelevant, but it remains alert to sudden changes or irregular sounds that might signal danger. This is an evolutionary adaptation. Our ancestors needed to sleep while remaining alert to threats. Consistent background sound allows the threat detection system to relax because any actual disturbance would create a noticeable change in the sound pattern. Many people sleep better with some background sound than in complete silence. The wind in the trees provides this naturally, a rushing, sighing sound with variation enough to be organic but consistency enough to be soothing. It's loud enough to mask small disturbances but not so loud as to be disruptive itself. Combined with the shelter of walls and the warmth of your bed, the sound of wind outside becomes comforting rather than concerning, a reminder that you're protected inside while the weather does its work outside. Your breathing slows, deepens. Your thoughts begin to drift in that pre-sleep way, disconnected and associative. Images from the evening float through your mind, the frost patterns, the flames, the curls of wood falling from the spoon you carved. The hypnagogic state, the transitional period between wakefulness and sleep, is characterized by unusual thought patterns, vivid mental imagery, and sometimes creative insights, as the brain shifts from the logical, focused mode of waking consciousness to the more associative, symbolic mode of dreaming. During this twilight state, you might experience hypnagogic hallucinations, seeing patterns or images with closed eyes, myoclonic jerks, sudden muscle twitches, sometimes accompanied by a sensation of falling, or auditory phenomena like hearing your name called. Your thoughts become less linear, more imagistic and symbolic. The boundary between memory, imagination, and perception becomes fluid. Many artists and inventors have reported getting creative ideas in this state. Salvador Dali would hold a spoon over a plate and nap sitting up, knowing the spoon would drop and wake him as he entered the hypnagogic state, which he found fertile for surreal imagery. Thomas Edison used a similar technique with ball bearings. The state is brief, usually just a few minutes, but it represents a fascinating window into how consciousness transforms between states. As you lie in your warm bed, mind drifting, you're experiencing this ancient transition that humans have experienced for hundreds of thousands of years, the nightly passage from waking to dreaming, from day self to night self. Your body grows heavy, sinking into the mattress. The warmth has fully established itself now, cocooning you. The small sounds of the cabin, the occasional tick of cooling metal, the whisper of wind, the barely audible breath of your own breathing, blend into a symphony of nighttime peace. Sleep itself, despite being a universal human experience, remains somewhat mysterious to science. We know it's essential for memory consolidation, cellular repair, immune function, and emotional regulation, but the exact mechanisms and the evolutionary purpose of consciousness shutting down for hours each day are still not fully understood. What we do know is that sleep deprivation is catastrophic to health and functioning, that different sleep stages serve different purposes: light sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep, each with distinct brainwave patterns and functions, and that sleep needs vary by age and individual. Infants sleep 16 hours or more, adults typically need 7 to 9 hours. Elderly people often sleep less but may need more. During sleep, your brain clears metabolic waste products through the glymphatic system, consolidates memories from short-term to long-term storage, processes emotions, and rehearses motor skills. Your body repairs tissues, synthesizes proteins, releases growth hormones, and regulates metabolism. Dreams, occurring primarily during REM sleep, may help process emotions, solve problems, or simply be a side effect of the brain's nighttime maintenance work. Theories vary. What's certain is that sleep is not simply rest or time off, but active, essential biological work. As you drift towards sleep in your winter cabin, your body prepares for this work, the nightly restoration that allows you to wake refreshed, ready for another day. Your last conscious thought is something about the snow, how it will look in the morning, how the world will be transformed yet again by the night's steady accumulation. And then thought dissolves into sleep. Outside, the snow continues to fall, silent and patient, building the white world higher. The wind moves through the pines with its ancient voice. The temperature drops further, but inside the cabin, the banked fire glows, releasing its slow heat into the small space. The night deepens. Hours pass. The moon rises behind clouds and crosses the invisible sky. Small creatures move beneath the snow in their secret tunnels. Trees stand sentinel. The cold does its work, and the warmth does its work, and everything is exactly as it should be. In the cabin, you sleep, deeply, peacefully, dreaming perhaps of summer forests or mountain streams or nothing at all. Your breathing is slow and even. The quilts rise and fall with each breath. Your body repairs itself, your mind sorts and files the day's experiences, your spirit rests in the profound safety of shelter and warmth and solitude. This is winter. This is the cabin. This is the ancient rhythm of cold and warmth, darkness and light, activity and rest. This is a life lived close to the essential things: fire and food, shelter and silence, the turning of days and seasons. And when morning comes, you will wake to a transformed world. You will rebuild the fire from its sleeping coals. You will heat water for tea and prepare simple food. You will look out at the snow-laden forest and feel the deep satisfaction of having passed through another winter night safely, warmly, peacefully. But that is for morning. For now, there is only sleep, and snow, and the quiet breathing of the night. Sleep well. The cabin holds you. The winter keeps you. All is well.